This happened last summer during a road trip. I was going out west to California with my friend Ray to go to LA and visit a friend of ours from high school who lived out there. We had been driving for almost 2 days at this point and had just made it into California. We had stopped at many places along the way for food, hotels, and lots of cool sights to see. It was about 6 p.m. at this time, and we had stopped in a town that had almost everything, like stores and restaurants. We stopped at a Target there to get some things. I had been driving for the last few hours, and as we got out of the car, I felt my pocket for my phone, and when I did, I realized it wasn't there. I expected it to have fallen out of my pocket on the seat or between the seat, but I couldn't find it there when I looked. I began to look all around the car, and I couldn't seem to find it anywhere. Ray stopped to help me look, and before long we were turning the car upside down looking for my phone. I hadn't remembered using it in a while, mostly because I had been driving and Ray had been looking up stuff on his phone. I started to panic because we had stopped at so many places and I had no idea where it was. I knew I had used my phone earlier that day, but I couldn't remember exactly what time. We had a lot of stuff in our car, so we got back inside and Ray decided to call my phone, hoping that it was still hidden somewhere. We shut the doors so it would be quiet, and as Ray called me, we listened closely for a ring to come from somewhere inside the car. As the call was made, my heart dropped as I didn't hear any sound at all coming from inside the car. I feared the worst, but Ray said maybe my phone was just dead and that's why it wasn't ringing. But just then, something unexpected happened. Someone answered my phone. We were so shocked that we didn't know what to do or say for a second. Ray said hello eventually, but there was silence on the other end. Ray explained that I had lost my phone, and whoever this was who had answered it had my phone. Still, there was no response. Then, an almost whispered voice on the other end said, "I can see you." We thought this had to be a prank, but also didn't really know how to respond to this. The voice once again said that they could see us. Then they told us how we were sitting in the Target parking lot and described the kind of car that we were in. Suddenly, we both got very creeped out. We asked who this was, but they didn't answer. I asked if I could please have my phone back, but after that, whoever was on the other end hung up on us. Ray and I were both really creeped out, and it was pretty obvious at this point I wasn't going to get my phone back, so we both decided to just leave and we'd stop someplace else. We drove away, but about a half hour later, as we were driving down the road, Ray got a call on his phone. It said it was from me, and when he answered it, he put the phone on speaker. We heard the same voice from before on the phone again, and they said once more that they could see us and then hung up before we had a chance to respond. We kept driving and didn't stop for about another hour. We were looking over our shoulders for the rest of the day, but nothing else strange like that ended up happening. I ended up getting a new cell phone once we got to LA, because my other one was getting kind of old anyways. But there's more to the story. About a month later, after we had returned from California and I was back home, I got a package in the mail. Inside of it was my old phone with a piece of paper attached to it which read, "I don't need this anymore. Thanks for the information." This was really creepy. How did they know my address? And how did they know where Ray and I were driving? I had so many questions and was kind of worried for a few weeks after that, but nothing else ever happened since. Maybe it was just some sort of a prank, but either way, it was pretty creepy. A couple of months ago, I had an experience where I lost my phone. It was during one night when I was at the grocery store like any other. I left my car to go into the store, but about 10 minutes later, when I wanted to use my phone, I realized that it wasn't in my pocket. I realized I had probably forgot it in the car where I had it earlier, so I walked out to the car, but when I did, I couldn't find it. My fear was that my phone fell out of my pocket as I left the car, and someone else took it, because it wasn't anywhere on the ground that I could see. I went home that night and decided to use the Find My iPhone app that I had on my iPad. This was an app that would allow me to see the location of my iPhone if it was lost. I opened up the app to find the location of my phone, but when it showed the location that it was at, it surprised me. It appeared that the phone was at my house. I was so confused because I knew I had my phone in my car earlier, but when I got to the grocery store, I suddenly didn't have it. I really didn't think my phone was in my house, but I decided to look around because according to my Find My iPhone app, it was at my house. After searching all over the place in every possible location I could think of, I determined that it definitely wasn't there. I guess the Find My iPhone app must have been broken or something. But the next day, I decided to try it again. This time when I went on it though, it showed my iPhone was on the other side of town. It was about 15 miles away and wasn't even near the grocery store that I had originally thought I had lost it at. This was even more confusing to me now. I thought about driving to the location, but I wanted to wait until my friend could go with me. I could still message on my iPad, so I asked my friend Robbie to go with me, and he said he could when he was done with work that night. Several hours later, at about 6 p.m., I was in my living room when I heard the sound of my back door rattling. It sounded like someone was trying to get inside, and I thought maybe it was Robbie, so I walked over to the door. But as soon as I got a look at the back door, I saw a figure of a man much larger than Robbie, and I did not recognize who it was. I didn't get a good look at his face at all, and I darted back out of view of my back door and ran into my bedroom. I took my iPad in there, and I heard whoever was there keep trying to open the door. Then the noise stopped, and it got quiet until I started to hear noises from a back window. I decided to call the police from my iPad and tell them that there was an attempted break-in in my house. I stayed hidden in my bedroom as I waited for the police to arrive. As I was on my iPad, I switched apps to message Robbie what was happening. When I passed the Find My iPhone app, I accidentally opened it back up, and when I did, I saw that my iPhone was now showing that it was back at my house again. That's when my brain connected the dots, and I realized whoever was trying to break into my house must have had my phone. The house got silent again for a while, and eventually the police arrived. When they did, I told them everything I knew. We tracked my iPhone once more to a different location, but this location turned out to just be on the side of a random road, not really near any buildings. I was able to get my phone back, but I never figured out who took it. I've always been an avid hiker, and have gone on literally hundreds of different hiking trails over the last several years. I've explored just about every trail and good place to hike near where I live, and whenever I travel, the first thing I do is look for good trails as well. I really enjoy being out in nature whenever I can, and it makes me feel really good and relaxes me. Anyways, the story I'm telling you occurred about 2 years ago now. I went to a trail near a wooded area which was about 15 minutes away from where I live, really out in the wilderness. There was a hiking path in the area, but I wanted to go off the path a little bit because I had been on the hiking path before. There was some great land in the area, and even though there wasn't an official path in this one spot, there was plenty of space to walk around, and it was kind of an unofficial path. I walked down that ways for a good 30 minutes or so, but then the terrain started to get really rough, and after a while, I wasn't really equipped for it with the shoes that I had on, so I turned back to return to my car. I got back and drove all the way home before realizing that I didn't have my phone on me. I got that terrible feeling you get when you lose your phone, and after looking around in my car, I realized I hadn't remembered using my phone since I had been way out in the woods. I realized that I knew exactly where it probably was. Well, not the exact location, but an estimated area of where it would be. I realized it likely fell out of my pocket as I walked over the rough terrain in the woods. By now it had gotten dark out, and I was a little bit hesitant to go back out there, but I had been out in the woods at night before, and I wasn't scared at all. I hadn't seen anyone else in the park that day either, so I wasn't too concerned anyone would take my phone or anything like that. Like most people, I used my phone for everything, so even though it was nighttime, I decided to drive back and quickly go out to get my phone. I was very confident I would find it, and as I got there and set out to the path again, I couldn't help but feel slightly creeped out entering the woods at night all by myself. I walked on the path to the point that I had gone off of it earlier. I have always been really good with directions and landmarks, so I knew it was the same spot. Then I followed the little unofficial trail until the part with the bumpy terrain to where I expected my phone to be. And as I entered the area, I thought I heard a noise of a tree branch cracking in the distance, maybe 50 feet away. It caused me to pause in my tracks and go silent, but I heard nothing else. As I started to walk again, I heard more noises though. I thought it was some type of animal and looked in the direction. I didn't see anything, and then heard the noise of walking in the distance again, but it sounded distinctly like a human the way the footsteps were. Still, I knew it was unlikely that anyone would be out here now. I nervously decided to call out hello on the slim chance there was another person out there, but I got no response. I wasn't sure what kind of animal it would be though, and as I slowly walked closer, suddenly I finally saw my phone on the ground. It was such a relief to finally see what I had been looking for. Now I could get out of the woods. I picked it up, and as I did, I started to hear the noises again coming towards me. I just couldn't tell what was making the noises. I looked all around, and finally off in the distance, I thought I saw what appeared to be a person ducked behind a tree. All I really saw was a leg for a second, and that was it, but I decided to get out of there as quickly as I could. I didn't want to run, so I started slowly walking, but it quickly turned into a fast walk, and as I heard noises behind me, I couldn't take it anymore and I turned it into a full sprint. I ran as fast as I could through the woods, hearing some noises behind me as I did. The noises weren't really that close, and I couldn't tell for sure if I was being followed or not, but I was not wasting a second in there longer than I had to. I had my phone, and I was just happy to get out of there. When I finally made it back to my car, I immediately started it up and left. I drove home, and once I got back, I finally was able to respond to some texts that I had gotten and things like that. As I was on my phone, I noticed that the camera app had been opened. I went on it and noticed some photos on my phone that I didn't recognize. There were several pictures taken on my phone during the time that it had been lost in the woods. One appeared to be of the sky, and another couple were of the ground that were blurry. Then I saw one that appeared to be a man, but it was really blurry. I couldn't make out any details of his face with how blurry it was or anything like that, but seeing those photos really gave me the creeps. That woods was really out there in kind of the middle of nowhere, and I can't believe anyone else was out there, much less who would have been on my phone. I'm quite certain whoever took those photos was the person out there in the woods with me.
This is something that took place back when I was about 12 years old. During this time, I lived with my parents and siblings in a neighborhood with lots of houses in it. However, not every house looked the same, and there were many different sized yards. I remember that there was this one house a ways down my street that was abandoned. I didn't know the story on it, but I know that one of my friends lived 2 doors down from it. This house had a bigger yard, and there were lots of trees on the property as well. So many, in fact, that you could barely even see the house from the street. It had been abandoned for several years, and I honestly don't know why. I had a few friends that lived in the neighborhood, and I went to school with them and stuff. One evening, I was hanging out with the friend who lived by the abandoned house. His name was Kyler. It was approaching sunset, and I was over in his yard. I don't remember how, but we got to talking about the abandoned house. I was curious about it, because I didn't know anything other than that it was abandoned. Kyler said that we should go over and look at it, so we walked along the sidewalk in front of his house and past the next door neighbors. Then we were standing in front of the abandoned house. There was a gate that was a little bit open and really rusty. The front yard was overgrown with long grass and lots of trees that needed trimming. I remember that Kyler just started walking up in the yard. I followed him, and then he walked past the gate. At that point, I asked him if we were allowed to go back here. He said, "Yeah, the property's abandoned, so who cares?" Then he claimed that he had been in the yard several times before. He started showing me the house and talking about it. We went all the way around it and into the backyard. There, the grass was also overgrown, but there were patches of dirt as well. Then we noticed that a back door to the house was open a little bit. Kyler and I walked over to it. I think that we were both pretty curious as to why the door was open. We both knew 100% that the house was abandoned. Kyler said that the door was not open the last time he was back there. I asked him if he had ever seen the inside of the house before, and he said no. At that point, we both decided to go in. Kyler opened the door just enough for us both to enter. Once we were inside, we saw that all the lights appeared to be off. It was getting dark out now, so the visibility wasn't the greatest. I could tell, though, that there really wasn't much of anything inside the house at all. We were in what was maybe the dining room or living room. I saw a kitchen area to the left. We both walked in farther and saw that there were a few pieces of old furniture here and there, but really not much. I remember seeing a staircase going up, but we walked past it and went towards this hallway. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing, and I didn't really want to be there. To me, we had seen enough and probably should be going. But Kyler continued to walk through the house and went down the hallway into what I think was a bedroom. I remember that I stayed back a little bit. I was still in the hallway when Kyler walked inside of the bedroom. At that point, though, I suddenly heard these footsteps. It sounded like somebody was actually upstairs. I listened close and realized that somebody was definitely coming down the staircase. I quickly ran over into the room that Kyler was in. This appeared to be mostly empty as well. I told Kyler that I heard somebody coming down the stairs. At first, he didn't believe me and thought that I was just messing with him. But a moment later, we both heard the footsteps arriving at the bottom of the stairs. I went over and quietly closed the door to the room that we were inside of. We heard the person begin to walk around. The footsteps got slightly closer to us. My heart was beating like crazy, and I was literally sweating. The footsteps did not enter the hallway though. Instead, they headed to the front side of the house. When this happened, Kyler and I knew that we needed to get out of there. We felt that whoever was in there probably heard us, and they were now looking for us. I opened the door, and then we both sprinted out of the hallway into the back door of the house. Luckily, it was still open how we left it. Neither of us bothered to look back where the person had walked. When I was going out the door, though, I did hear footsteps approaching, but they were still a distance away. We both left the house, and then fled on foot around the house and back out onto the sidewalk. Then we both went back to Kyler's house. Whoever had been inside of the house did not leave or follow us. After that night, we never went back there again. I'm not sure who was in there. That was one of the scariest moments of my life, though. This is something that took place years ago, when I think I was about 19. During this time, I lived with my parents in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I was working only about a mile away from home at a store. It was a part-time job, but I remember that at one point, my car broke down and had to be fixed. I would be without it for a few days, but still had to work. During this time, I walked the mile distance to work, which was really not too bad. It was a little bit different route than I would take while driving, though. So the first day that I was walking to work, I remember I passed by this old convenience store in town. The store was now abandoned and had been for several years. I went there a couple of times when I was really young, and seeing it brought back a lot of memories, but I walked right past it to work. However, when I got off work and I was walking home afterwards, I passed by the store again. This time, I was curious and I walked closer. There was a small empty parking lot in front and to the side of the store. The store was very small, and it was basically like a convenience store that you would see with a gas station, except there were never any gas pumps at this one. I walked up to the front and looked inside one of the windows. Inside, the lights were off, but things looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There was still a lot of things inside the store. It was sort of messy and looked really strange to see. It was interesting to me though, and I stood at the window for maybe 5 minutes. As I was looking around, I suddenly saw a man come out from behind one of the aisles inside. This was really strange, because the building was abandoned. The man looked right at me, and I quickly turned and walked away. I kept going down the sidewalk back home. It was really creepy to see a person inside there. The man did not appear to be any kind of construction worker or anything like that. I went the rest of the way back home, and the next day when I walked to work, I went past the store again. But that night, I got off a little bit later than usual. I was walking right by the store again on my way home. This time, I got curious once more, and I stopped to look in the window. It was much darker now with it being nighttime. When I was looking though, once more a man appeared from behind an aisle, this time much quicker than the last time. This guy started walking towards me at the window, and I turned and walked away again. I left the parking lot and then went back onto the sidewalk. Then I crossed a nearby street and went onto another sidewalk. But it was about at that point where I heard footsteps behind me. The sidewalk that I was on was very quiet, and nobody else would ever really walk on it. So this was strange. I turned around and looked, and saw the guy who had been inside of the convenience store. He was walking a pretty long ways back, but appeared to be walking after me. It made me a little bit nervous, but I kept going home. I probably had about 10 minutes left of walking to get there. Most of it was straight, but I would turn several more times. The first turn that I made, I was positive that the guy would keep going straight, but he didn't. He turned with me, and that made me a lot more nervous that he actually was following me. He wasn't really gaining on me at all though, so I started to walk faster. The next turn, I didn't see him for a while after I had made it around, and I actually thought that he was gone. But then I saw him come around the corner and continue to follow me. By this point, I didn't have a whole lot farther to go. I kept walking, and soon my house was in sight. I looked back, and the guy was still there following me. At that point, I made a run for it, and it's probably something that I shouldn't have done. I started sprinting, but at the time that I did, for some reason, I looked behind me. The man also started to sprint. I ran for my house, and luckily it wasn't that far away. I arrived and struggled to unlock the door, but eventually I got it open and went inside. I looked out of the front window and saw the guy now walking down the sidewalk. He did not come into our yard, but stopped and was just kind of standing there on the sidewalk in front. He was not looking at me, and he wasn't even looking at our house, but he was just standing in front of it, looking down the street. Then, after about a minute, I saw him turn around and walk back. I don't know what he was doing. He was probably mad at me for looking inside of the store, but I really didn't mean anything bad by it. I was just curious. After that, I walked a different route to and from work until I got my car back. I'm not sure when it changed, but today, the convenience store is a newer one. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 8 or 10 years old. I lived in a neighborhood that had a cul-de-sac on it. There were several kids in the neighborhood that I was friends with, and we would all hang out. So one night, I was with some friends and we were playing several games in the street. We started playing hide and go seek, and we basically had the entire cul-de-sac to ourselves. My friends and I lived in almost every house on the cul-de-sac, except maybe 2 or 3 of them. One house though, the one at the very end, was abandoned. Everybody knew that, but not many people knew why. It was an old house, and I really couldn't remember the last time anybody did live there. So I remember that one of my friends stood in the street and began counting. We all started running away, scattering to find our hiding spots. I remember that I suddenly got this idea to hide behind the abandoned house. I figured nobody lived there, so no one would be mad that I went in their yard, and I also thought that my friend would never think to look there. I felt like I had almost found a loophole in the game and would easily win for sure. So I went onto the property and then into the backyard. Then I crouched down behind one corner of the house. The backyard to this property seemed to go back kind of far. There appeared to be a woods at the end of the yard that went on for who knows how long. Several minutes went by, and I knew that my friend was looking for everyone. I couldn't hear much from where I was, but I did hear a little bit of chatter from some of my friends off in the distance. As time went on, I felt more and more confident that I wouldn't be found and would win the game. I was just waiting to hear them say that everyone had been found except for me. So when I was just sitting behind the house back there, I casually turned around. When I did, I saw this man standing in front of the woods. He was staring right at me. The guy was somewhat big, and I couldn't tell many details about him other than that. It was really dark out. I had no idea who he was, and it really creeped me out. As soon as I saw him, I got up and ran back around the house. I didn't care about hide and seek anymore. After making it around the house and down the driveway, I saw a couple of my friends in the street. They saw me running and then looked behind me. The man had come out around the house and was standing sort of at the side of it. When we all saw him, I think everybody got really freaked out and just scattered. At that point, we all went running back to our houses and then went inside. Everybody knew that that property was abandoned, so seeing a random man walk out from the side of it meant it was time to go inside. After we all went back to our houses, it was already getting late, and we wouldn't be able to stay out for much longer anyways. So none of us went back out, and I was really creeped out by seeing the guy. I really never expected it. However, I didn't tell my parents or anything. That night, I don't remember much else until I went to bed. My bedroom was at the back side of the house, and I had a window out to the backyard. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night. The first thing I noticed was that there was a knocking sound from my bedroom window, and that must have been what woke me up. I looked up and saw a man standing there, looking in. He was the same guy that I saw in the backyard of the abandoned house. The guy was just staring at me on the other side of the window. I got up and ran out of my room to my parents' bedroom next door. I started banging on their door like crazy until they got up. When we returned to my bedroom, the man was gone. I remember that my dad went outside and looked around the property, but he couldn't find him. After coming back inside, my parents called the police. They arrived several minutes later, and I don't really remember much after that, but I know that the next day, I told one of my friends about it. She said that she also saw a man at her window the previous night. He went away pretty quickly though. This guy must have went to at least 2 of our houses. After that though, nobody in our neighborhood saw him again. It still gives me the creeps to think about it to this day.
This happened just a couple of weeks ago when I went to Walmart one night. I think it was about 8 o'clock, and I went there to only get a few things. When I got inside the store, it seemed pretty normal to me. It wasn't too busy, and it wasn't completely dead either. I didn't waste any time and started walking to the right. The first thing on my list was to get some more soap. As I was walking down that way, I remember seeing a man walking in the opposite direction. He was wearing a shirt that said "human mammal" on it. I specifically remember seeing that. But afterwards, I passed him by and kept walking. After getting the soap, I then headed towards the back end of the store. I was over there getting the last several items, and it took me a little bit over 5 minutes. Then I headed back towards the front end of the store. When I made it a little more than halfway to the front, that particular area was very quiet. But there was one person there, and they caught my attention. It was the man that I had seen earlier, and he was standing in a random aisle, just pushing things off the shelf. It was like he was trying to make a mess. The man had slightly long dark hair, was somewhat big, and a little bit less than 6 feet tall. When I saw him doing this, I couldn't help but look. I was going to just keep walking past him, but when I got kind of close to him, I stopped. The man looked at me as he continued throwing things on the floor. I asked him what he was doing. I didn't say it in a way as if I worked at Walmart or as if I was mad at him. I was just genuinely curious. The man looked at me as I spoke, but did not stop his actions. After my question, he looked away and completely ignored me. I looked around and did not see any employees in the immediate area. When I looked back to the man, he was giving me the middle finger. I thought about saying something to the guy, but decided not to and just walked away. Somebody would see what he was doing soon enough, and he would probably get kicked out of the store or banned. I walked the rest of the way over to the self-checkouts. Then I checked out and started to leave. Well, I guess as I was checking out, the man in the human mammal shirt walked over to me without me knowing, because as soon as I was walking into the parking lot, I looked back and saw the guy walking behind me. He was like 50 feet back, and at first, I wasn't sure if he just happened to be leaving at the same time as me or not. I don't even know why I decided to look behind me, but I'm glad that I did. The guy appeared to be looking right at me, which was strange, but I ignored it. I continued as normal and got to my car, unlocked it, and went inside. I wasn't in a rush to leave or anything, but when I started the engine and was getting ready to back out, I saw him. The human mammal had followed me all the way to my car and was now standing right behind it. He was looking at me through the rear window of my vehicle. I waited for about a minute, and he didn't move at all. Then I rolled down my window and yelled to the guy, asking him to move. He ignored me completely. He just stood there with barely any expression on his face. This guy was really confusing to me. I honked my horn, and he still didn't move. So then, I turned my engine off and got out of my car.
At first, the man still didn't move. I asked him what his problem was, and he still ignored me. I wasn't really sure what to do. I didn't want to get in the guy's face or anything because he seemed sort of unpredictable. I decided to walk back inside Walmart. As I went through the parking lot, the man calmly walked behind me, following me yet again. By the time I made it to the doors, he was maybe 10 feet behind me. When I walked inside, I wasn't really sure where to go, so I just started walking. But when I made it sort of past the self-checkouts, I saw a few employees standing around. The man behind me was still about 10 feet back, and one of the employees approached him. He tried to walk past, but another employee walked in front of him. I heard that they were confronting him about throwing things off the shelves of the aisles. Somebody must have seen him, or possibly he was seen on security cameras. This allowed me to get away from the guy, and I turned around and left the store while he was still there. This time, he wasn't able to follow me. I left and haven't seen him since. Hopefully he was banned from the store or something. I'm really not sure why he did all of that. It was like he was just trying to cause problems. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job working at a Walmart. It was about 10 minutes away from my parents' house, where I lived at the time. I was in high school and would work sometimes after classes were over or on weekends. During this time, I did not have a car, and my parents would drive me to and from work. I was hoping to earn enough money from my Walmart job over time to possibly buy a car. A couple of months after I started working there, I had a shift one night. I started at 4 p.m. after school and got off at 9 o'clock. I was a cashier and was at the check lanes for my entire shift. Things pretty much went by as usual. The store was not too busy, and there was really only 2 hours where there were a lot of customers. Other than that, it was fairly quiet. I actually was able to get off a little bit early that night. At about 8:45, my manager told me that I could leave now because things were so quiet. I left the check lanes and went to the employees-only area of our store to clock out. Then I texted my mom, letting her know that I was off early. She knew that I worked until 9, and sometimes I would get off a little bit early or later. My mom replied quickly, letting me know that she would be leaving to come and get me. I left the store and walked to the front of it. There were a few benches looking out to the parking lot on the sidewalk area over there. There were also a couple of small plants and trees as well, scattered around. I sat next to this tree on a bench, where I would often sit and wait for my mom to pick me up if she wasn't there already. I went on my phone and just waited. The parking lot was pretty quiet for the most part by now. It was getting to be a little bit later at night. Still, occasional customers would come inside the store or leave. There were also a lot of cars in the parking lot with all of the employees we had, as well as the customers. I remember seeing this one car, which was a larger and older looking SUV, enter the parking lot. It drove around, and then drove right in front of the entrance doors, which were a little ways to my left. Then it slowly went forward and past me, going to the other set of doors. I watched it go past those doors and take a left, going back through the parking lot. I really didn't think much of it and focused my attention back to my phone. But I remember a couple of minutes later, looking up and seeing the car again. It was back, as if it was taking another lap around the parking lot. It was also moving at a very slow speed. This time, the car came to one of the parking aisles and then turned to go towards me again. It drove along the front of the store and slowed down some more. Then it stopped, literally right in front of me. I had a sort of bad feeling about it for some reason, but I was more confused than anything. This certainly wasn't my mom's car. After the SUV stopped, the passenger side window, which was closer to me, rolled down. Now I could see that there was a man in the driver's seat, and he was looking right at me. He then yelled to me, asking if I needed a ride. The man said that he could drive me home or to wherever I was going. I shook my head and told him no thanks. I didn't get a good look at the guy, but I remember that he had sort of dark and long hair and was wearing a baseball cap. He said that I should go with him and waved me over. I still said no, but the man did not drive away. I thought he would leave, but for a few moments he just sat there. Then, suddenly, his driver's door opened up and the man started walking around the car. The next thing I knew, I saw the guy emerge from behind his car, and he was walking right towards me. He was moving at a fast pace, and I quickly got up from the bench. I turned and ran for the entrance of Walmart and didn't look back. I made it inside within probably 10 seconds, and then I finally looked behind me. The man had not followed me into the store. I didn't see him immediately outside either, and figured that he had gone back to his vehicle. I remained inside the store, sitting on an inside bench until my mom texted me that she was there. She arrived about 5 minutes after I had entered the Walmart and let me know that she was in the parking lot out front. I walked out and saw my mom's car and got inside of it. When I did, I felt much better. I told her about what had happened and we looked around. Then I saw the same SUV in the parking lot. This time it was parked in a space and the engine was running. We left and luckily were not followed or anything. I remember that when we got home, I called my boss and reported the incident. I'm not sure if the guy ever came back or anything. For the rest of the time that I worked there, nothing like that happened and I never saw the guy either. For a little background, I'm a female and live fairly close to several different Walmarts. There was one in particular, though, that I would typically go to because it was the closest to my house. I would say that I went there maybe once a week on average. I did most of my regular shopping there because the prices were cheaper than most other grocery stores. One night, I went there at maybe 8 o'clock or so. I was going around the store and getting a few things. The store was pretty quiet, I remember, and because of that, I noticed that someone seemed to be following me around. I really didn't know exactly when they started, but I walked through about 4 aisles with the same person trailing me. I stopped and looked back. It was a Walmart employee. He was sort of short and had dark brown hair and glasses, and when I looked at him, he kind of stopped. Then I turned and kept going. But shortly after I left the aisle, I saw him again. I couldn't believe it. It was so obvious that he was following me, but I didn't know why. I decided to go to a random aisle sort of far away. He followed me, saying about 30 feet back at least. When I got into an aisle, I stopped there, and he stopped at the end of it. I couldn't take it anymore, so I approached him. I walked to the end of the aisle where he stood, seemingly looking at items on the shelf. He must have been trying to make it look like he was working and not following me. I said to him, "Is there a reason why you were following me around the store?" The guy looked at me all confused and claimed that he wasn't. He said that he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him how he had gone down every aisle that I did for the last 5 minutes at least. He claimed that it must have been a coincidence and said that he was always moving around the store. I just shook my head and walked away. When I did, he didn't follow me. The fact that I confronted him hopefully let him know that I knew what he was doing. I didn't feel like reporting him or anything though. I finished up my shopping and then left without seeing the guy. After this experience, I figured that it wouldn't happen again. After all, I had caught him. But the next time I went to that Walmart, roughly about a week later, it did happen. This time, it was harder to tell. He did a better job of following me while still keeping a distance, but I could still tell that he was following me. I had noticed him not that long after entering the store. I noticed him across the walkway in another aisle. I moved away, hoping that he hadn't seen me yet at all, but I saw him again a short time later, closer to me. When I moved to another aisle just a short time later, I saw him at the end of that aisle. At that point, I decided to just leave. I didn't even bother to buy anything at all. I was pretty creeped out by the guy. He didn't follow me out of the store or anything, and I hoped to not see him again after that. I considered not going back to that Walmart after. The next time that I had to go to the store, I went somewhere else. But several weeks later, I must have forgotten about it, because I went back to the Walmart and was hoping to have a normal shopping trip. I wasn't thinking about the guy until I noticed him again. It was maybe 5 minutes after I had entered the store, and he was walking by about 20 feet away. When I remembered him, I decided to just leave immediately. I would go to the next closest Walmart instead, which was maybe 5 to 10 minutes away. I turned and started walking to head out. When I did, I sensed him walking behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw that he was in fact walking behind me. He was maybe 20 feet back. I went straight for the exits and walked out of the doors. To my surprise, he walked right out of the doors after me. I couldn't believe it. After maybe 10 feet of walking through the parking lot, he was still following me. At that point, I just started running. I sprinted for my car, unlocked it, and got inside. When I did, I looked around for the guy, but I didn't see him at all. I'm not sure exactly where he went, but he could have easily been hiding behind any car in the parking lot or something. I left and went to another store. After that, I did not go back to that Walmart. I called them up and reported what had happened, but I'm not sure how they handled it. I'm not sure what the guy was doing either and why he thought he could always follow me around like that. I've thought a few times that maybe he didn't even work at the Walmart. Maybe he was just wearing the vest. It's possible, but I honestly think that he did work there. When he followed me out of the store, it was really unexpected though. I'm hoping that I never see him again. I used to work at Walmart. I worked there for about 6 months, and I mostly just stocked shelves. I also worked past close often and would work overnights. The job was pretty easy, and I would usually get there at about 10 o'clock at night and work until 6 a.m. The store closed at 11 p.m., so for about an hour I would be working with customers in the store, although generally there were very few of them at that hour. Our particular location was probably one of the quieter ones. We were always hiring and often a little bit short-staffed, even with it being one of the quieter Walmarts. I imagine that some other Walmarts probably have lots more employees than we did. One night, I got to work at 10 o'clock and had some boxes of items to stock shelves with in the grocery area. At around midnight, I was by myself in one of the back grocery aisles. It was mostly quiet in the immediate area where I was. But out of nowhere, I heard something fall off of seemingly one of the top shelves in the next aisle over. I thought this was weird, and I stopped what I was doing to go see. I figured that another coworker was there for some reason. When I walked around the corner and looked into that aisle, I didn't see anybody at all. I went back to what I was doing and continued with work. For the next 10 minutes or so, everything was normal. But then, out of nowhere, I saw this guy walk into my view for just a second. He was passing by my aisle and did not appear to be an employee, but I only saw him for like a second. I got up and walked over. When I looked around the corner, I saw him disappearing into another aisle. I called out asking who was there, but got no response. I decided to go and see who it was. I walked over and into the aisle where the guy went. When I looked down this one though, I didn't see anybody. It was really strange because I didn't hear him leave the aisle. I was sure that he was there. I kept looking down that aisle, and then I saw him. He was hiding within the aisle on the bottom shelf. He was mostly covered by boxes and was about halfway down. I just barely saw his head peeking out between the boxes. It was a really strange sight. I should have just walked away and found my boss, but I decided to call out to the man again and ask him what he was doing. When I did, he did not move or answer me. I told him that he had to leave and we were closed. I don't think this really had much of an effect on him though. He remained hidden, even though I knew where he was, and he also knew that. I left at that point to find my boss. I walked a ways away, and I let him know that there was somebody hiding in one of the aisles. We both walked back over to the aisle where the man was, but when we got there, we were just in time to see him running away. He went sprinting out of the aisle and out of both of our sights. We briefly walked over to where he had gone, but he had been running pretty fast. My boss told me that it would be taken care of, and I could go back to work. As my boss walked away, I heard him radioing in to somebody else, and I felt at ease about the situation. I went back to work after, like usual. I stocked shelves for the next hour and a half or so. But then, as I was over there by myself, I heard a noise of somebody approaching me. I turned around and once again was expecting to see a coworker, but I saw the same guy. Somehow, he was still here. I thought my boss told me he was going to take care of it. The guy startled me, and I got up and immediately started running away. It was the only thing that I could think to do. The crazy part is the man actually started running after me. He gave chase as I ran past several aisles before finding a coworker. When another coworker saw us, the man finally diverted and ran into another direction. At that point, both my coworker and I went in the opposite direction of the guy. The police ended up being called, and a bunch of us employees were evacuated from the store. When the police got there, they went inside and were able to catch the man after probably 10 minutes. I'm not sure how, but the guy had been able to elude everyone for several hours. He stayed in the store after closing, and nobody was able to kick him out. He would hide in the store and move around when nobody was watching him. What his ultimate plan was, I don't know. It really creeped me out though. I'm glad that I saw him when I did. I'm not even sure why he was approaching me. I had a bizarre experience after shopping at Walmart not too long ago. It was a normal afternoon, and I was doing some grocery shopping. I was at my local Walmart, located roughly 10 minutes from my house. The store was pretty busy, with lots of other people shopping. I was inside for at least half an hour and in one of the grocery aisles. When I was there, a man struck up a conversation with me. The man was probably about 5'8", had glasses, and was bald. He started out saying hi to me and asked me what I was shopping for. It seemed a little bit strange because he didn't work there and usually other people don't talk to you. The way he spoke was somewhat friendly, but it seemed a little bit odd. I said I was doing some grocery shopping and was almost done. He spoke with me a little bit longer, asking me if I was going home after, and I said yes. I found that question a little bit odd, but the man then told me that he had a lot more shopping to do and started to go over several things that he was buying. I figured that he was just trying to be friendly, and I didn't really mind talking to him, even though it was a little bit awkward. The conversation really only lasted for a couple of minutes. Then I told the guy that I was going to check out after I got the last item, and I said bye to him. He said bye as well, and seemed to walk in another direction. I then went over to the self-checkout area and started scanning all of the items from my cart. It was kind of busy over there, and every other register was occupied by a customer. A line was even starting to form of people after I got there. Within the crowd of people though, when I was almost done checking out, I saw the man who had talked to me. He was in line to check out and behind somebody that was also waiting. He was kind of hard to see, but it was definitely him. It seemed a little bit odd to me because I thought he had told me that he had more shopping to do, but I really didn't think too much of it. I just finished checking out and then left. After leaving the store, I loaded up my groceries into my car and then drove away. Everything went fine, and I got back home about 10 minutes later. I went inside and put everything away. When that was done, maybe 5 minutes after arriving back home, I looked out of the front window. I have a large front window off the dining room on the right side of my house. It looked right out to the driveway and then the street. When I looked out there, I saw a car coming down the street. The neighborhood is usually quiet, and cars driving by is not something that happens every minute. I just casually watched the car drive by, and I didn't know or care who it was. That is, until it turned right into my driveway. This made me really confused. I had no clue as to who it would be. After the car parked, I was still there about 5 feet away from the window, looking out. The door of the car then opened, and I saw the same guy from Walmart get out of it. He then walked right up the driveway to my front door. As he was walking up, I quickly ducked down. I really don't know if he saw me or not, but he proceeded to knock on my door, to which I did not answer. I was too creeped out. He knocked again, and I stayed where I was. I didn't even want to get up, or he might be able to see me. After probably 5 minutes, I hadn't heard anything in a little while, and I got up. I saw that he wasn't at the front door anymore, but then I looked over to the left and realized that he was at another front window. He was looking in, and I ran out of the room. After that, I was ready to call the police if the guy tried to break in or something, but when I went back to look a few minutes later, he was actually gone. His car was also not in my driveway, and I felt much better. I haven't seen him since. I really don't know how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me home without me noticing or something. I'm glad he didn't try breaking in. Why he went to my house in the first place, though, I don't know.
In my early childhood, I would spend nearly every day riding my bike. It was a normal summer afternoon when I went out with my friend once when I was 8 years old. We pedaled around the neighborhood racing each other and stopping for snacks. After a couple of hours, my friend had to go home. I still had some time, so I decided to ride on my own. I took a route that went through a quiet area where the trees lined the streets and the houses were spaced apart. It felt peaceful at first, but soon I noticed a white Volkswagen not far behind me. I didn't think much of it initially. Cars passed by all the time, and I figured it was just another driver out for a leisurely afternoon. But as I continued, I realized that the car was following me. I took a left turn, then a right, trying to shake it off, but the Volkswagen stayed close. I remembered what my dad had taught me about safety and what to do if I felt threatened. I pushed my bike harder, trying to distance myself from the car. Then it stopped beside me. A man stepped out. He was hairy with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He smelled really bad, but I remembered that I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't cover my nose. He stood a bit away from me on the curb and crouched down to my level height and asked if I was okay. I nodded, saying I was fine and just biking, keeping my eyes on him, trying to gauge his intentions. The man went on to say that he was a friend of my parents, and they had told him to find me and drive me to my grandma's house. My grandma had been dead for 5 years now, and I knew that he wasn't who he said he was. I'm not sure if I would have believed him anyways at that age, because I didn't think my parents could possibly be friends with someone who smelled that bad. I called him a liar and then started pedaling again as hard as I could. As I started leaving, the man reached out to try to grab my arm, but I had already put enough distance from him to avoid his grasp. I rode straight home, not checking to see if the car was following me still or not. The only thing I could think about was the man and what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. When I finally burst through the front door, my parents were in the living room. I was shaking and crying as I told them everything. My parents called the police, describing the type of car that I had described. Miraculously, on their way to my house, they passed the white car that had been following me and arrested the smelly guy who was driving. Then they arrived at my house, and after my verification that that was the guy that tried to grab me, the police left with the man. I had no idea what ended up happening to him and what his consequence was. I think my parents knew, but since I was pretty young, they told me to not worry about it and that I would be safe. It was scary when it happened, but looking back, it felt good that the guy had ended up being caught. One summer evening when I was about 9 or 10, a serious accident happened just a couple of blocks from our farmhouse. We weren't home when it occurred, but had heard about it from our neighbors. The next day, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked my mom if I could ride my bike up to the corner where the accident took place. I wanted to check out the area to see if I could see anything that had been left over, and I was also just bored. My mom said yes, but warned me not to go any further. She was hanging laundry on the clothesline outside and kept an eye on me as I pedaled away. Our area was rural and quiet. My brother and I rode our bikes everywhere and always felt safe. When I got to the corner, I hopped off my bike and began to look around at the scattered debris. There were bits of broken glass and a crumpled piece of metal. I didn't know much about cars, but it was fun to look at for some reason. As I poked through the leftover wreckage, I heard a car approaching. It was a dark blue station wagon. The two men inside looked older, maybe in their 40s. I felt uneasy immediately, and then they rolled down the window and called out to me. They asked me which one of them was cuter. I jumped back on my bike, pedaling as fast as I could back to my house, which was less than half a mile away. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them turning the car around to follow me. As I biked down the road, I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping my mom would hear. Thankfully, she had heard me and was running toward me, her face a mix of confusion and concern. The station wagon was close behind still, but as we neared our driveway, the men hesitated. They must have seen my mom coming closer, because they slammed on the brakes and turned their car back down the gravel road, heading away from us. I didn't stop pedaling until I reached my mom. When I explained, she was understandably shaken. She called the police, who came to get information, but there wasn't much they could do. I told them what I remembered about the car and the men's faces, but there wasn't too much to go off of, so I don't think they ever found them. It was scary that something so dangerous could happen so close to my house, where I had always felt very safe. I live in a busy city and would often ride my bike to get places so that I wouldn't have to deal with traffic, and I just enjoy biking. I had a heavy single-speed bike that was perfect for short trips, but would always be a workout when going up hills. One evening, I decided to ride to the grocery store. My route took me through a park, one that I had biked through before and knew well. As I pedaled along the dirt path that ran around the perimeter of the park, I found myself struggling up a hill. The weight of the bike felt particularly burdensome, and I could hear the sound of someone jogging behind me. The rhythmic thud of feet hitting the ground was unmistakable, and it grew louder as they gained on me. Feeling embarrassed by my slow pace, I decided to let the jogger pass. I veered to the right, expecting them to zip by, but they didn't. I kept pedaling, trying to speed up, but the sound of their footsteps stayed right behind me. I didn't want to risk looking behind me while biking up the hill, in fear of hitting a rut or rock in the dirt path. I even slowed down a ton, just waiting for them to pass, but they never did. Finally, I pulled off the path and into the grass, ready to turn around and give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But when I turned, I was met with nothing but empty trail. No jogger and no more footsteps, just silence. I looked around, scanning the park for any sign of movement, but there was none. The jogger had vanished. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was baffled because I was certain I had heard someone right behind me. After a few minutes of standing there, I finally hopped back on my bike and continued to the grocery store. That night, back at home, I started to look up more about the park that I was biking through. Apparently, the park had been built over a cemetery, primarily for the poor. They had moved some bodies, but not all. Estimates suggested there were still around 2,000 remains buried underneath the park. I even found stories from people who claimed to have seen apparitions or felt cold spots while walking through the park at night. It seemed to make sense now that if the park was haunted, that it had something to do with my experience while biking through it earlier that day. I still bike through that park fairly often, but haven't had anything strange happen to me again, although I try to avoid it at night. When I was younger, I would go on many cycling trips. The year after I graduated college, I embarked on a long-distance cycling trip across Australia. I'd cycled through many places and had some strange experiences, but one night stands out in my memory from when I was in Australia. I had been riding for weeks in Western and Southern Australia. Most of my journey was uneventful, filled with the sounds of nature and the rhythm of my bike tires against the dirt roads. On this particular evening, I found myself cycling alongside a pipeline that hugged the highway. As dusk approached, I decided to find a quiet spot to camp. I veered off the dirt road, moving inland. The deeper I went, the more I felt I was leaving civilization behind. I stumbled upon what looked like a small forest, with overgrown ruins peeking through the trees. Stone walls were jutted out from the ground, remnants of houses that had been there long ago. It felt eerie, but also interesting, as if nature had taken the land back from the past. I decided this was a nice spot, so I stopped and set up my tent, ensuring that the area was clear of brush and debris. After a simple pasta dinner, I snuffed out the fire and crawled into my tent. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and darkness had enveloped the forest quickly. I had grown accustomed to camping alone, and nights spent outdoors were nothing new to me. But that night was different. The first thing I noticed was an unsettling silence. Normally, the forest is full of sounds, whether they're comforting or intimidating, but it was dead silent. I lay in my sleeping bag, straining to hear any sound such as crickets, animals, or anything, but there was nothing. Eventually, I heard loud and deliberate footsteps though. I speculated that it was a person. I couldn't think of an animal that made such a distinct walking sound that I knew of. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice my presence. The intervals between the steps were oddly spaced, like someone was taking their time. I debated between grabbing my torch and confronting whatever was out there, or just sitting in silence. Moments dragged on, filled only by those ominous steps circling my tent. The footsteps continued for most of the night, sometimes fading into the distance, only to circle back. I must have sat there for what felt like hours, gripping my shovel tightly in case I needed to use it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the sun was peeking through the trees, casting light into the tent. Outside, the forest was alive now with sounds I had missed earlier that night, such as birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I quickly scanned the area for any signs of what happened during the night, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no indication that something had circled my tent. It was as if the forest had returned to its natural state, erasing any evidence of the previous night's terror. I hurriedly packed up my gear, shaken but relieved to be moving again. As I cycled back towards the pipeline and the highway, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling of whatever had happened the night before, certain that it wasn't just my imagination. I love riding my bike at night. I would often go for night rides on this trail near my house. I had been on this trail many times and never saw anything strange until this one night. As I was riding, the beam from my bike light sliced through the shadows, illuminating the narrow path ahead. I was biking fast, and as I rounded a bend, something caught my eye. Off to the right of the path, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. Since I was going pretty fast, it was only visible in my headlight for a split second, but it was a person, their outline barely visible in the darkness. They seemed to just be standing there, motionless. I flew by and questioned if my eyes were playing tricks on me and if I had really seen someone just standing there in the woods. I was a little bit nervous because the trail I was on was just one big loop, with the entrance and exit being the same path. So on my way back out, I would pass by that spot again. As I finished the loop and got back onto the path where I had seen the figure, I was nervous about seeing it again. I didn't even want to see it, and I kept my eyes on the path right in front of me, not daring to look out into the woods when I approached the spot. But I couldn't avoid seeing it this time. In the middle of the trail stood the same figure. This time I could make out a bit more detail. It looked like a man, though it was hard to tell in the dark. He stood there, legs apart, blocking my path. I slowed down, unsure of what to do, but this was the only way out. I had to pass him. I yelled at him to get out of my way, but there was no response. I pushed down on the pedals, hoping to dart past him somehow, but as I got closer, he suddenly lunged towards me. My heart sank as I realized he was trying to push me off my bike. I swerved to the left, almost hitting the trees on the left side of the path. As he tried to grab me or knock me off, I kicked my right leg into him, trying to kick him and push him back away from my bike. I don't know if it was his shoulder or arm, but part of his body made contact with my upper body as he tried to shove me off the trail and off my bike. I'm not even sure how, maybe just crazy adrenaline, but I had managed to stay upright on my bike through all this and not hit the trees on my left as I squeezed past him. I pedaled hard, pumping my legs as fast as I could all the way back home. That night, I warned the authorities about the guy on the path and hoped that maybe he would still be there when they arrived, but I doubted it. I'm not sure if he was trying to mug me or maybe he wanted to steal my bike, but either way, he was crazy enough to try to attack me on foot while I was biking. I still bike that trail all the time, but I always have a firearm with me now just in case.
This happened back when I was in middle school. I believe it was my 8th grade year. Back then, I would consider myself to be a pretty average kid. I was a decent student, but during that school year, I remember there was this kid named Jake who was in my grade, and I did not get along with him. Jake wasn't really part of my friend group, and he always seemed to be a little bit more of a troublemaker. He would skip class a lot and things like that. I knew these things because I happened to have a bunch of classes with him that year, and the year prior as well. I don't exactly remember how it started, but I felt like he hated me and was always rude to me when we would have to talk to each other during class or something. One day at school, somebody in my friend group mentioned how Jake had casually said some negative things about me. Of course, I wasn't around when he said it, and it made me really angry. I ended up confronting Jake after class in the hallway, and I said some things that I probably shouldn't have looking back. It got a little bit heated, and some friends sort of had to calm us down. After that, a day or two went by without us speaking to each other or anything. Then came that memorable day. I don't remember exactly what day of the week it was, but probably later in the week. The classes that I had with Jake were 2nd period and 3rd period. Both classes went by without us so much as looking at each other. As far as I was concerned, I was going to ignore him for the rest of the school year. Then, during 5th hour, I had gotten to my classroom and was on my phone waiting for class to start. I saw that I had received a text message from a new number. I opened it, and it said that it was Jake, and he wanted to patch things up with me. He then said that he wanted to meet me during 5th hour for 5 minutes at the South End bathrooms. I considered this, and at first didn't want anything to do with him. But then, I thought about it again and figured that it would be best to sort things out with Jake. As much as I was angry with him, I didn't want to go into high school having enemies, and I thought maybe Jake would apologize to me or something like that. I texted Jake back that I would, and he texted back saying that he would be waiting. So when a good time in class came, I asked my teacher if I could go to the bathroom, and he said yes. I then walked down to the south bathrooms. The south bathrooms were the farmost bathrooms at the end of a hallway. They were popular because of how out of the way they were. My classroom was sort of far away, and it would take me almost 2 minutes to get there. I was lucky that my teacher for 5th period was not that strict, and we mostly just did busy work, so he wouldn't really care if I was gone for a little bit. As I was probably 3/4 of the way there, suddenly I heard noises come across the school speakers. At first, I was really confused. I didn't know what it could be. Then I saw a teacher a ways up come walking out of their classroom. When she saw me, she called me over to her class. I went with her, but I still had no idea what was happening. She told me that we were in a lockdown now, and I had to stay inside her classroom until it was over. I could see that there was no other students inside the classroom. I recognized her, but I never had a class with this particular teacher. She told me that she did not have class during this hour. Her and I waited inside her classroom for maybe 10 minutes until the lockdown was lifted. It was very fast, and I remember that afterwards I was sent back to my original classroom. When I had made it back there, I was only there for like a minute, and then the principal herself knocked on our classroom door. I then was asked to go with her. All of these things happened really fast, and I was confused until I was later told what was going on. Apparently Jake had invited me to talk to him at one of the bathrooms, and then told one of his friends that he didn't plan to talk to me when I got there, but to, quote, mess me up bad. I was told that he was seen by another student walking to the bathrooms with a possible weapon. What weapon he had, or what he was using as a weapon, I never found out, and I don't know if I want to. Anyways, when the kid saw him, he reported it to his teacher, which caused the lockdown. He was quickly found, and luckily, the teacher spotted me before I made it to the bathrooms. Jake ended up getting expelled from our school for this incident. When I was in high school, some classes I liked and some classes I really hated. One of the classes that I found especially boring was economics. Part of it was the teacher that I had. He was nice, but a really boring guy to listen to. Plus, he would often give us packets to work on instead of more interesting ways to learn. Because of this, I would occasionally go for longer bathroom breaks during class. It was my final class of the day, so at that point, I was struggling to just stay awake, and I couldn't wait to get home. I remember that one day, it was in the fall, and I got to econ class and was extra tired. It was Friday and it had been a long week, so about 15 minutes into class, I asked if I could use the restroom. The answer was yes, which is what it typically was, and I walked out and into the hallways. I always felt good leaving a classroom when class was going on. I walked down to the nearest bathrooms and went inside. Nobody else was in there, and I went inside one of the stalls. As I was in there, I took out my headphones and put them in. Then I started playing some music on my phone and scrolled through Instagram. I would say about 5 minutes later, I got up and left the bathroom. When I got out into the hallway, I paused my music and took out my headphones. Then I walked the rest of the way back to class. When I got back to my classroom, the door was locked. I tried opening it a few times and then knocked on the door. I saw my teacher, Mr. Phelps, look out at me from the window. Then he opened up the door and let me in. When I got inside, I saw everybody in the class was sitting on the floor at the back of the room. They all looked at me as I walked in. Mr. Phelps told me to sit on the floor with the rest of the students and that we were under a lockdown. When I got to the back of the class and sat down, I asked if it was a drill. The kids around me were shaking their heads and saying no. Somebody asked me if I had seen anything. I told them no and explained that I just went to the bathroom and I didn't see anything at all. We all stayed sitting on the floor in the back of the classroom for probably like 40 minutes or so. I don't know exactly how long it was, but it sure felt like a really long time. None of us knew exactly what the lockdown was for, and we didn't hear anything out in the hallway either. There were a few times when somebody asked Mr. Phelps if he knew what was going on, but he always told us no. At last, the lockdown finally ended, and we were allowed to go home. Everybody wanted to find out why we had been under a lockdown in the first place, and within a few hours, everybody knew. But it hit me harder than most. The lockdown had been caused by a suspicious man breaking into the school. He was seen very shortly after entering, and when questioned by a teacher as to who he was, he ran. That caused the school to go under a lockdown, and the authorities were called. When police arrived and searched the school, it took a while, but eventually the man was found. He was found hiding inside of the bathroom, the same one that I had been in just before. I was clueless that there even had been a lockdown going on because I had my headphones in. I'm glad that I was, though, because I probably would have been scared about it. I do wonder how long after I had left the bathroom the man got there, though. I'm currently a high school math teacher. This story takes place a couple of years ago. I worked at a different high school, and I won't say where it is, but I was also a math teacher at that school as well. There, school went from 7:50 a.m. to 2:40 p.m. every day. When school ended, I would stay after and grade assignments and prepare class for the next day. I never really knew exactly how long after I would stay, but usually a couple of hours. One day, I was in my classroom by myself and had just finished grading a bunch of assignments. I would guess that it was about an hour and a half after school had ended. I went down the hall and printed off some things that I needed for class the next day. Then I went back to my classroom to do a few more things. As I was working on and preparing for the next day's lesson, suddenly I heard a sound come over the school speakers. The phone on my desk rang as well. I picked it up and I heard in the automated tone that the school was going under a lockdown and this was not a drill. This was unusual and I had never experienced a lockdown before. School was not going on, but there were still many teachers there and some students who were involved in after-school activities. I went over to the door, locked it, and then turned the lights out in the classroom. Then I went back to my desk. Of course, I was very curious why there was a lockdown going on, and I texted another teacher who I was friends with. They didn't know either, however, and I decided to just keep working at my desk. About 30 minutes passed, and we were still under a lockdown. I sat at my desk, working, when I thought I heard a slight noise. At first, I couldn't tell if it was coming from the hallway or inside my classroom. I stopped what I was doing and listened. I could now hear more clearly, but it didn't make any sense. It sounded like somebody was inside my classroom. I looked all around it, but didn't see anything strange. I sat there silent, just looking around my classroom for a good 2 or 3 minutes in a row. The noises stopped for the most part, but then, finally, I saw one of my cabinets in the back. It looked like there was a shoe sort of sticking out of one of them. The door was also cracked open a few inches. I couldn't tell if I was really seeing this at first. I kept watching it until I actually saw it move a little. Then it moved back inside the cabinet entirely. When I saw this, I felt a large rush of adrenaline, but not in a good way. I knew there was somebody hiding in my classroom, and I did not know who they were. I texted a teacher down the hall that I knew, who also happened to still be there, and I told him what happened. I told him that I was going to head over to his room. Then I got up from my desk and tried not to panic as I walked over to the classroom door. When I was walking, it felt like forever, but eventually I did make it to the door. Then I unlocked it and walked outside of the room and into the hallway. From there, I walked a ways down the hall until I got to the classroom I was headed to. I was let in and felt much safer in there. We were able to report to the school the person in my classroom then. I couldn't believe that somebody had been hiding in my room. And sure enough, he was found, still hiding in my classroom. It was a guy who was on drugs, and he had broken a window in the back of the school and came inside. I really don't know what he was capable of, or why he had chosen my classroom to hide in, but I'm sure glad that I saw him when I did. This happened many years ago when I was much younger. It was the school year, and a typical weekday for me. This meant that I had to walk to school. It wasn't all that bad though, because my family lived in a rather warm climate, and the walk to school would take me a good 15 minutes. I would go a few blocks down my street, and then connect to the sidewalk on a slightly busier street. Then my school was only a couple of blocks away from there. One day, I walked to school just like any other. It was dark outside, because it must have been shortly after daylight savings or something. But I just know that about halfway to school, I noticed that there was a guy walking on the sidewalk behind me. I turned fully around and looked at him because of how unusual it was. In all of my walks to school, nobody had ever walked on the sidewalk near me, except sometimes another student who lived closer. It was a pretty quiet area for the most part. This guy was rather tall and had sort of long hair. I did remember his face, and that he had sunglasses on, which was weird. I think what I got suspicious of the man, though, was how he acted when I turned around. Turning around, I expected him to look at me or maybe say something. I wasn't trying to talk to him, but he was only like 20 feet away. When I did, he stopped and kind of looked around inconspicuous. It was as if he was just looking into the woods next to the sidewalk that we were on. I turned and kept going to school. When I did, I heard the guy now walking a ways behind me still. This continued for probably 5 more minutes. I had made it within maybe 2 blocks of school, and that's when it sounded like the man was starting to walk much closer to me. I was now scared, and I decided to start running the rest of the way to school. Whoever that guy was a real creep. Luckily, I made it to school safely, and the guy wasn't following me anymore when I got there. I went inside and got to my first class. That school day was normal until 3rd period. About midway through the class, our teacher told us that we were going into a lockdown. This meant that all doors had to be closed and locked, and all lights had to be turned off. The teacher stopped teaching, and we all pretty much just had to sit there and wait. Our school was not all that big, and we never had lockdowns, so this was very scary for us. I remember feeling nervous, but I didn't even connect the man that had been following me earlier for some reason. It took a long time, I think about an hour, but finally the lockdown ended. When it did, we resumed our normal classes. For the rest of that school day, it was pretty normal, but it didn't feel that way. I think everybody was busy thinking about why we had a lockdown, but nobody told me. I was just told that things were now safe for us. When school got out that day, my mom was there to pick me up instead of the usual routine of me walking home. When I got in the car, she asked me if I was okay from being in a lockdown. I asked my mom if she knew what it was for, and when we got home, she told me. She said that there was a guy hanging out behind the school, sort of hiding in the woods. He ended up being arrested for trespassing, and when I saw his picture, immediately I recognized him. It was the same guy that had followed me to school. Of course, I told my mom this, and we then told that to the school. The guy actually lived in a house that I passed every day on my walk to school. It's very creepy to think about, and I feel lucky to be all right. When I was in high school, during my senior year, I was a teacher's assistant for a gym class. This was great for me because I've always liked sports and athletics. I was the assistant for a teacher, Mr. Robertson, who had been my personal favorite gym teacher. Being an assistant for him was great because occasionally I would get to play the games the class was playing with them. Other times, I would do actual work, like help set things up or help to grade a few assignments that the class had. The class was the second hour for me, and one day we were going to play kickball. We used those large mats that can fold up as bases, and Mr. Robertson asked me to go get some from the storage closet when class started. This was a bit of a trek. The storage closet was outside of the gym and a ways down 2 different hallways. It was pretty inconvenient, but our school was sort of old, so off I went to get the 3 mats. Luckily, they had those flat carts, so you could just wheel the equipment in, and that made things a lot easier. I got to the end of the hallway, which didn't have any classrooms attached to it, and was only used for storage rooms. Then I opened the storage closet and looked inside. Once inside, I saw inside the dark, cluttered closet and turned on the light. Turning on the light switch didn't do a whole lot of good, and it was still pretty dim in there, but it was better than before. I looked around the room until I found the mats. When I went to grab them, though, I suddenly and clearly saw some random guy come out from behind a large box. This guy had long, stringy hair and a baggy, short-sleeved shirt on. I turned and ran out of the room, closing the door behind me. When I made it outside of the room, for some reason, I had it in my mind to hide in one of the other storage rooms in that hallway. Looking back, I wish I would have just ran all the way back to the gym, because I probably could have outran that guy, but it was sort of a long ways, and for whatever reason, I quickly found a storage room, got inside, and hid. I heard the door to the storage closet open like 5 seconds after I hid. I then quickly went behind some large object that I couldn't see because it was pitch black in there, and then held my breath. I was careful not to make a sound. I heard footsteps walk out into the hallway and get closer. The footsteps slowly continued walking, and then they got quieter. It sounded like they passed by the room that I was hiding in, but I couldn't quite tell. I took my phone out of my pocket and quickly turned the brightness down. Then, I attempted to text one of my friends what was going on, but I had no signal in there. I wanted to leave, but I had absolutely no idea where the guy was now. I sat there waiting and trying to hear some kind of noise to indicate where this guy was. However, I wasn't hearing anything at all. I thought about going back to class, but every time that I did, I just kept picturing the guy waiting right outside the door for me. The real problem was that I had no way of contacting anybody to tell them what was going on. I stayed there. I don't know how long I was there, but eventually I heard over the intercom outside in the hallway that there was a lockdown going on. I figured somebody must have seen that guy, but was he far away from me now, or was he still right over here? I was banking on him being far away, and I decided that I could leave now. I got up from my hiding spot and took a few steps towards the door. But literally right when I was about to open it, I heard footsteps coming my way. I didn't know whose they were, but given the fact that the school was under a lockdown, I figured it was that guy again. I stopped where I was and tried to be silent. The footsteps walked closer and closer at a fast and steady pace. Eventually, they reached me, but passed by the room that I was in. I was pretty scared at that time, and I did not want to leave anymore. I slowly and quietly made my way back into my hiding place. Some time went by before I once again heard footsteps. They were coming from the same direction that the guy had came from before. This time, the footsteps got right outside the room that I was in, and then it opened. Light poured into the room, and I saw a police officer stood in the doorway. I was really glad to see him, and I ran out of the room. He told me that they knew where the other guy was hiding, and that I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I was returned to my class, who was locked down inside the gym. The guy was caught a short time later. Looking back at this, it was the scariest moment of my high school career. I really don't know how the guy got inside the school, but I'm glad everyone was okay.
Back when I was in college, I went to Florida one year for spring break with a few of my friends. It was going to be us 4 girls staying in a hotel near the beach in Florida. We were all very excited for the trip, as we had planned it months in advance. When spring break came, we all flew down to Florida together and soon arrived at the hotel. It was a pretty nice place, not fancy or anything, but was overall nice. We were up on the 5th floor, and the hotel was just a few blocks from the beach. For the story, I'm just going to give my friends very basic names, Jenna, Sarah, and Anna. So we had a large room for the 4 of us all to stay in, and it had plenty of space as there were sort of 2 rooms in it. There was a sort of living room area and then a bedroom and bathroom. It wasn't massive, but it was pretty nice. The first day there after arriving, we went out and did some fun stuff and had a good time. The second day was great as well. However, that night is when the story really starts. So I remember that Jenna said she was leaving to get something, I can't remember what, but she said she would be right back. Maybe it was another towel from the front desk or something like that. Anyways, she said she would be back soon and then she left out the front door. Probably like 2 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I had realized that Jenna probably had forgotten a key to the room and she was knocking to get back in. Anna asked who was there and I told her probably Jenna. So Anna, who was closer to the door, just walked over and opened it without even looking. As soon as she did, I remember seeing this man standing there. He was pretty tall and I hadn't seen him before. He then started to walk right into the room and didn't even say anything. Thankfully, Anna had a good reaction. She saw him entering and quickly slammed the door back shut. The man thankfully backed up and left the room, or else he would have had the door shut on him. And Anna hit the lock to the door and then looked at me. We were both shocked. Sensing the commotion, Sarah then came over and asked what had happened. We all went around and looked through the peephole, and the man was now gone. As we were all talking about it, a few minutes later, Jenna returned. She told us that she didn't notice the guy out in the hallways, and she wondered if it was possibly a mistake. But I didn't think so. It seemed crazy how he saw us and then still tried to walk right in, and he didn't say anything either, so I didn't really think it was an innocent mistake where he just had the wrong room. For the rest of the night, he didn't come back or anything, which was good. The following day, we went out again. We stayed out late and got back to the hotel at probably like midnight. However, I was hungry and so was Jenna, so I decided to order something on Uber Eats. A while later it arrived and I went down by myself to pick it up in the lobby. I was not thinking about the guy from the previous night. However, after I got to the lobby and picked up the food, I saw him again. The lobby was pretty much completely empty at this hour. When I started walking away, I saw the man turn and start to walk after me. I didn't even know where he had come from, but he now seemed to be following me potentially, so I walked back and headed towards the elevator. But I knew that it would take a long time to wait for the elevator potentially, so I decided to take the stairs instead. I walked past the elevators and down a hallway. As I did, I heard footsteps a ways back, still coming in my direction. It was just me and this guy out in the hallways. I made it to the stairwell and entered it. Then I started quickly walking up the stairs. As I had made it up a couple of flights, and I was about at the 2nd floor, I heard the door open to the stairwell below. The man was definitely following me. I hurried up and went faster. I couldn't see the guy, but I could hear him, and it now sounded like he was running up the stairs. So I started to run. I made it up a few more flights to the 5th floor. I didn't look back, and when I got to the door, I opened it and then sprinted down the hallway towards our room. As I was running, I got the key ready.
When I approached the door, I heard the man then running down the hallway after me. I was able to unlock the door pretty quickly and then get inside the room. When I got inside and closed the door, I instantly looked out the peephole and then saw the man. He didn't try to enter the room, but he just walked away down the hallway. This guy was seeming like a big problem, and that wasn't the end of him. That very same night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone trying to open our door. I knew it was the same man, but it was more than trying to open the door. It sounded like maybe he was trying to pick the lock or something. I instantly got up and ran to the door and saw him there through the peephole. Then I called 911 and woke everybody up. I also called the front desk. Thankfully, an employee from the hotel came up to our floor pretty quick. This scared the man off and caused him to run away. By the time the cops got there, he was gone though. However, he was on lots of security footage and the police felt confident that they would find him. For the rest of our trip there, we didn't see him anymore. Still, it was a really scary experience for us. I'm not sure what would have happened had I not gone back to the room as fast as I did, or had the door not been closed right on him the night before. When I was in college one year, I decided to drive and visit a friend for spring break. We both had spring break at the same time. My friend attended a school that was about a 5-hour drive away from mine, but neither of us had any plans, and her college was larger and in a city with more things to do, so we made plans for me to stay there. She also had space at her apartment, which was nice. So I packed up a few things for the week and left my campus after classes and was going to do the whole drive that same night. My last class got out sometime in the afternoon, and so I was hoping to arrive by maybe 9 or 10 p.m. that night or so. The first part of the drive there was kind of a lot of traffic, but once I really got out there on the highway and it got past about 6 p.m., things started going really smooth. After driving for a really long time, I was out there kind of in the middle of nowhere. I stopped right off the highway at a rest stop to use the bathroom and also get some gas. When I went there, I was not there for a very long time. Something weird happened though when I left. I was inside the building and came back to find a car parked right next to mine when there hadn't been one there before. In fact, it wasn't that busy and there hadn't been any cars on either side of me for several spaces. This was not the weird thing though. When I got back in my car, as soon as I left, the car left as well. It was like as soon as I backed up, this car started and started backing up, and then when I started to drive away, it did too. I found that a little interesting, but still not too big of a deal. It could still just be a coincidence. So I left and got back out onto the highway, and the other car was behind me. It was probably like 20 minutes later when the car was still behind me that I started to think it was really weird and potentially suspicious, because I hadn't been in the same lane the whole time. I had passed a few people and stuff. I just had the thought that maybe the car was following me, so I decided to slow down and see. I was already in the right lane, and I went down to slightly below the speed limit. I expected the other car to pass me, and most normal ones would, but it did not. Instead, the car just slowed down with me and continued to follow. I was getting paranoid, so I decided to take the next exit, and I did. I made a random turn, not even knowing where I was. I was still about an hour from my friend's college. The car made the turn too. And then I had the brilliant thought to drive to a police station. I had to look one up on my phone, but there was one about 10 minutes away. So I put in the directions and then I drove there, and the car followed me the entire time. The car even pulled into the police station parking lot after me, but then it continued to drive through the lot and then left. When I saw the car go, I was relieved, and I didn't bother to go in and report it or anything, although I should have. Instead, I waited there for a couple of minutes and then I left and continued to my friend's place, confident that I had lost the person who had been following me. When I was driving the rest of the way, it seemed to go well. Eventually, I reached the exit of the highway for my friend's college, and a short time later, I arrived. I parked in the parking lot to her apartment building, and then she let me inside. Her place was on the 4th floor of the building. I remember that minutes after arriving, I happened to look out the window, and I noticed a car driving through the parking lot. It looked like the same make and model of the car that had been following me. The same color, too. I remember thinking to myself, that's a coincidence. But then I looked to the car, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought that maybe it was the same person. The car was just slowly driving around the parking lot. Then I saw it park in a space. I told my friend about what had happened, and we watched from the window. After parking, nobody got out of the vehicle. We watched for a while. Maybe 5 minutes later, a man finally got out. He then walked through the parking lot to the apartment front doors. However, he could not get in because they were locked, and he clearly didn't live there. The guy then just stood around the doors. My friend then yelled at the man from the window. She said if he didn't leave now, she was calling the cops. He looked up, and I quickly jumped back and out of the way so he wouldn't see me. I heard the man say something back, but I couldn't tell what he said, and neither could my friend. But surprisingly after that, the man walked away and left. I have no idea if he knew where I was going or was able to continue following me, because I'm not sure how he knew to go there. After that, I didn't see him again though. Still, it's absolutely crazy how he followed me for over an hour driving. And I will admit, after I thought I lost him, I didn't pay that close of attention to my surroundings. But I thought that I would have noticed if he was still following me, but I guess not. Years back, my friend Skylar and I went on a spring break trip together. We went to college together in a small town in the Midwest, where the weather was very cold. We planned a trip to Southern California for spring break. I remember that when we arrived, it was a lot of fun. Personally, it was my first time in California, and I enjoyed almost everything about it. There were some good beaches where we went, and it was just nice to be in sunny, warm weather and not doing school. A few days into the trip, and I remember that Skylar and I were on the beach getting a tan. Seemingly out of nowhere, this woman came up to us. She appeared very well put together, possibly wealthy, and invited us to a party that night. It might sound weird, and she mainly spoke with Skylar, not me, but she asked us where we were from and talked a little. She then invited us, saying it was an exclusive party and they were inviting people who seemed to fit the vibe. She then said that there would be over 100 people there, and there was going to be free drinks, and it would be a lot of fun. Taking her word for it, we decided to go. Us being young college girls, we thought that maybe there would be a celebrity there or something. Plus, the woman seemed legitimate, like the party she had something to do with would be upscale. She even gave us a small laminated business card with the date, time, and address. So we went back to our hotel, and then that night at the correct time took an Uber to the address. It was almost 30 minutes away. We arrived and the address was hard to find. I'm not sure exactly where it was looking back because I don't remember exactly and I don't have the card, but basically it was in an area with tons of buildings and streets. We walked down a sidewalk a little bit to find the place. Eventually we had to walk down this sort of back alleyway. It was dark out and we were starting to question the whole thing. However, we then saw this door open. It looked like the door had come out of the backside of a garage or something, and that garage appeared to connect with a larger building. The buildings around there were hard to describe. Some of them looked like houses, some of them I couldn't really tell what they were, but many of them were modern. When the door opened, this man wearing sunglasses waved us to go inside, so we walked over and entered the building. When we got in though, the man quickly walked away. He went through this other doorway and didn't say anything at all. Then he shut the door behind him before we could even get close to it. And meanwhile, as soon as we got inside, it was pitch dark in there. You could barely see a thing. We couldn't tell exactly where we were, but it seemed like a sort of lobby room or maybe like just an entrance room. But once the man had left this room, it was now entirely dark, so you literally could not see a thing at all. The door that we had entered through closed as well. We tried to get to the door the man had gone through, but now couldn't find it because we couldn't see. Eventually, we did get to it, but it was locked. We took out our phones and put our flashlights on. It revealed that we were in this very small room, probably about 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. It was still hard to see even with the flashlights, and the walls were this black carpet material and the ceiling was dark colored too. Even the doorways had the same wall as the rest of it with the carpet material, so it was really hard to tell where the doors even were because they were basically hidden and blended into the walls. We had just barely located the handle. We tried knocking on that door, but nothing happened. We tried yelling as well, but got no response. By this point, we were sketched out and decided to just leave. The card had no number on it or contact on it. It simply said the date, time, and address, which I think we were at. We felt around the wall for the handle of the door to leave, but when we finally did find it, that seemed like it was locked too. The floor was also this black carpet as well. It was really strange. We started to panic and began yelling and banging on the walls. It felt like we were locked in there. Also, our phones had no signal in there. It was like the room was blocking it. Both of us kept banging on the door to get out, yelling and fiddling with the handle trying to open it. Eventually, out of nowhere, after like 5 minutes of this, it just opened suddenly. We both went back out into the alleyway. It was almost like the door had been locked and somebody had unlocked it. I'm not sure what happened, but when we got back out, we ran out of there to a busier street. We then took an Uber back to the hotel. We never reported it or anything. I wasn't even sure where it was. Unfortunately, we dropped the card at some point in either the room or maybe the street, so we really had no evidence or anything. I still don't know what was going on there, but it was really weird, and I'm glad we got out when we did. This happened back when I was in college. I went to a university a few hours from my parents' house, and I lived there. For spring break one year, I didn't have any plans but to go back home and hang out. It was nice to have a break from my classes, and I left campus and went back to my parents' house. For an entire week, my only real expectations were to get a lot of sleep and to play video games in my bedroom. My older brother had already finished college and lived across town, so I was now the only one living there aside from my parents. After a good relaxing weekend, I began my weekdays of relaxation as well and started gaming. My parents both left for work in the morning and I was home alone and in my bedroom. This was upstairs and at the front of the house. I had a window that overlooked the front yard and the driveway and stuff. So as I was in there gaming, probably about an hour after my parents had left to work, I randomly saw a car pull into our driveway. The neighborhood is pretty average, so I thought that it was just a car that was going to turn around and drive the other way. The street is usually quiet, but there's a lot of houses around, so an occasional car is not a surprise. However, the car stopped and was sitting in the driveway for a while. I didn't recognize it and had no idea who it would be. My next thought was that maybe it was a door-to-door salesman of some kind. I had no plans to answer the door if that was the case. I continued to watch out of curiosity. A guy wearing a hoodie then exited the vehicle. Most of his head was concealed by it, other than his face, which I didn't get a good look at from my angle. The man then walked up the driveway, but turned to go towards the back side of the house and not the front door. This was really suspicious. He was quickly out of my sight, and I wondered what was going on. I then decided to leave my bedroom and go look. I went to a window upstairs that overlooked the backyard. I saw the man standing in the yard and looking around. Then, after like a minute, he casually walked back around the house and then over to the front again. I switched back to my room. Then I watched the guy walk back to his car and then get inside and drive away. I was really confused by this. However, he didn't try to enter the house or knock on the door or anything, so I pretty much just moved on. I did not tell my parents, and I played video games all day, forgetting about it. However, that same night I stayed up late gaming, which is no surprise. My parents had already gone to bed, and I was back in my bedroom in the same spot. It was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning or so. I remember that I heard the sound of a car driving up towards the house. I looked over once again to see a car pulling into our driveway. Now this seemed really suspicious, and I remembered the car and the man from earlier. This looked to be the same car. I felt dumb for not telling anybody about it. I watched the car stop once more and then turn off. After a short time, the door opened and it was the same guy, even wearing the same thing. He then started walking around the house again. This time, I left my bedroom and went downstairs and went to a window that looked out back. By the time I got downstairs, though, I heard the man trying to open our back door, which was locked. Then I heard him walking towards one of the back windows. I turned on a light and then turned on the back porch light as well. As soon as I did, I heard the man start running away. He went back around the house, got into his car, and then drove off really fast. I was unable to get a license plate or anything, which I felt stupid about, but I did call the police and report it and told my parents as well. The rest of my time at home that spring break, nothing else like it happened, and the man was not found that I'm aware of. But I'm really glad that I noticed the guy when I was home. If I had not been there, he may have been able to break into the house without my parents knowing. The first time he went there must have been scoping it out, but the way he did made it seem like he had been there before. Perhaps when I was gone at college he did. Maybe he knew my parents were both gone at work and didn't take me into account. I'm not really sure, but I'm just glad that he left when I turned on the lights. Something crazy happened a couple of years ago during spring break. My friend Emily and I went to the beach for spring break. We're not from an area that had beaches at all, so this was a great experience. We went to the ocean literally every day and had a great time there. There was also a lot of other people there, with it being spring break time for many schools. One of the days, after laying out on the beach for a long time, Emily and I left, but then realized that I forgot my phone at the beach. I'm not sure how exactly that happened. I think I just didn't see it and forgot. So when we were at our hotel, I realized, and then we went back to the beach and tried to find it. We also saw if they had a lost and found or something, but had no luck. So then Emily decided to call my phone. When she did, surprisingly, somebody answered it. My phone did not have a passcode at the time for some reason, so you could just go on it. After answering the phone, Emily asked who it was, but there was no answer. She told whoever was there that they had my phone, but the person still said nothing. Still, somebody had to be on the other line for them to answer. We heard nothing at all from them. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, they hung up. We tried calling back, but had no luck with that. Whoever had the phone didn't answer. So at that point, I felt bad about it and figured that I should just get a new phone somewhere the next day. We tried calling back again later, and Emily sent a text as well asking them to return the phone, but there was no response to anything. We went to bed that night and hoped for the best. However, in the middle of the night, I remember waking up. As soon as I did, I heard the distinct sound of somebody trying to open the hotel room door from the outside. I was instantly wide awake. I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a random guy standing there who I didn't know. He then knocked on the door, and I saw him holding my phone in his hand, at least it appeared to be my phone. Had he come to return it? The guy looked sketchy, and I didn't think Emily had given out our address or anything, so how was he here? I decided to take a chance. I yelled from the other side of the door, "Is that my phone?" The man looked up suddenly like he was surprised, but he didn't say anything. I told him that he could just put it on the ground. I was nervous to open the door. He still did not say anything, and he did not put the phone on the ground. I asked him if he wanted money. He still said nothing. I almost opened the door, but thought better of it. By now, Emily had woke up and came over to see. This guy was being really weird. I wanted my phone, but he wasn't communicating at all. Then the man finally spoke. He said to let him in and he would give the phone back. I made up a random excuse on the spot to try to get him to not come in. I said, "My dad is sleeping in here. I don't want to wake him up." As soon as I said that, the man turned around and just started walking away. It was like when he realized I was possibly with my dad, he wanted to get out of there, which made him only seem more suspicious. After that, he was gone. However, Emily looked on her Snapchat and saw that my location was shown as being there at the hotel, so that meant that the man was on the app. I thought that he would not give me the phone back. However, the following day there was a text back to Emily. It appeared as though a new person had the phone. The text said that they had just found the phone on the ground next to a sidewalk. They had picked it up and saw the text when trying to find the rightful owner. We met up with this person who was a completely different guy. I think the original guy dumped the phone after realizing he couldn't get in the room. I'm glad that he did, but the whole thing was really sketchy.
I'm a female. I work a pretty standard job in an office 5 days a week. One thing I really like to do, though, is cook. I cook dinner for myself almost every night. In order to do so, I go to the store for fresh ingredients probably every other day. Right on the way home from work, there's a Walmart only about a mile from my apartment, and I found that they usually have the cheapest prices, so I go there for produce and protein all the time. Sometimes I go to other stores, but by far the most common one for me is Walmart. This story takes place just a few months back. Like usual, I was stopping at Walmart after work. I would never get much, just like 4 or 5 ingredients usually, and sometimes whatever else I needed as well. I got off of work anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4, so I get to Walmart shortly after that each day. The store was usually sort of busy. One day, an employee by the produce area said hi to me. I mentioned this because the next time I was shopping, he said hi to me again when I was in the same area. Looking back, I hadn't really noticed him before, but I had never really paid attention to the employees. He was bald, had a small dark beard, and was sort of a big guy. He seemed very friendly, and the second time, he asked me how my day was going. We made very basic conversation for maybe 30 seconds before I told the man I better go, and I went on with my shopping. This ended up becoming a regular thing over the next couple of weeks or so. Every time I was shopping, this same Walmart employee would say hi and engage in conversation with me. I didn't mind it too much because he was always really nice, although when I was getting ingredients after work, I was sort of anxious to get home and didn't really want to chit-chat. The man did start to ask slightly more personal questions each time, like if I was coming home from work, where I worked, and where I lived, things like that. They were starting to weird me out a little bit. I wasn't sure if the man was just a really friendly employee or something else. I told myself he was just a nice guy, and like I said, it didn't really bother me. That was until one time I was walking through Walmart doing my usual shopping, and he approached me again. He asked me how my day was, and the usual. Then he asked me for my number. I was nice, but I told the man no. I was afraid he would get the wrong idea if I said yes. Besides, he should know how weird it sounded. I mean, come to think of it, I never really saw the guy doing any real work. He would always just be standing around and then talk to me. The man seemed offended when I said no. I started to try and explain my reasoning to the man, but he just turned and walked away as I started to speak. His whole body language changed. After he walked away, I resumed my shopping. He had gone further into the grocery aisles of the store, but luckily I didn't have to get anything back there. I was inside the Walmart shopping for maybe 10 more minutes before checking out and leaving. I remember that on that day, I parked in the back of the parking lot, and when I got inside my car, I noticed that the Walmart employee was inside a car not too far away from mine. I really have no idea how I noticed him looking back, but I'm glad that I did. I was assuming that he was either on a break or had just gotten off of work for the day. He did not appear to be looking at me, which I was glad to see. I pulled out of my parking space, only to see him pull out and exit the parking lot behind me. I watched in my rearview mirror, and he made the same 2 turns that I did to get back to my apartment. About a minute later, I was arriving at my apartment complex. I was kind of creeped out now because I was almost positive that this man did not live here. I drove around the parking lot of my complex a little and did not want to go straight to my building. I was really suspicious. The man's car trailed mine the entire time. When I realized that he was probably just going to follow me no matter where I went, I decided to leave. I did not know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there. I drove down the quiet road near the complex to a busier one. Then I signaled to merge onto a busier road. At this hour, that road in particular was really busy because it was almost 5 p.m. now and rush hour. With the man right behind me, I waited for a gap in the traffic. After about 30 seconds, there was one. But I waited until the very last moment and then pulled out. I basically cut the car off that was driving down the road, and there were several other cars behind it. The car honked at me, but the man behind me had no opportunity to merge at all. That allowed me to basically get away from the guy. I drove down the road for a very short time before turning. It was then that I had the idea to go back to the Walmart. I was fuming with anger. I drove straight back there and to the customer service counter. When I got there, I told them about how one of their employees had followed me home. This Walmart didn't seem to be the most organized, and they had to call up someone from the produce section to help. When I explained to them what had happened, they told me that nobody of that description works there. I realized that the man must have just put on a blue Walmart vest. Maybe he had worked at a Walmart in the past, or maybe he had just bought the vest online. Either way, he wasn't an employee of this store. I was even more creeped out now. They told me that they would keep an eye out for the man if he returned, which made me feel a very tiny bit better, but not a whole lot. After that, I very carefully drove back to my apartment again. Thankfully, I did not see the man or his car. I don't believe he knew which apartment building was mine either. Since that happened a few months ago, I have not seen the man. I also have not been back to that particular Walmart either. This happened last year. I was shopping at my local Walmart, just doing some typical shopping on a random weeknight. The store was pretty quiet, and it was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I had been in the store for about 15 minutes or so, and I was in the aisle where they have the fitness items. I was looking at one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying one that day, or even buying one at Walmart, but I had been considering getting one. When I walked by, I noticed it and stopped to read the box. I was in the aisle looking at it for a few minutes, and when I was doing so, I remember hearing some voices in the next aisle over. It happened to be a toy aisle, and this was at sort of the back corner of the store. I heard a man's voice, and then the voice of a child. At first, I paid no attention as I was looking, but soon I heard the man say, "I will buy you this toy if you come with me." I assumed it was the child's father at first, but I didn't really know why he would say that. I couldn't really make out what the kid said back to him, but I heard the man then say something like, "Your mom said it's okay." Then, I just had the crazy thought that maybe this wasn't the child's father. The man started saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple of times. I heard him starting to walk to the end of the aisle. I just had a really bad feeling about it. At the time, I didn't know if I was just being nosy or if I should do something. I decided to walk by the aisle and glance down it to see. I left the aisle that I was in and walked into the next one over, which was a toy aisle. And when I looked down, I saw a man wearing a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little kid and leading her to the other end of the aisle. Their backs were facing me. I was kind of thinking on the fly, and I said, "Excuse me," to the guy. He turned around and looked really surprised. I picked up some random toy from the shelf. It was some type of stuffed animal. I said I wanted to ask the man a question, if this would be a good gift for my niece. I then started walking over to them. He said he had no idea, and I said I thought he might know. I then asked if that was his daughter. He said no, and he was just watching her for the moment, but then said they really had to get going. Him and the child then walked away. I really wasn't sure if I should believe him or not. Maybe I was making too much of it. I realized it probably was a reasonable explanation, and I turned and started to walk into the opposite direction. I was telling myself that nothing was wrong, and I was just paranoid. But I'm not even kidding. About 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name. For this story, let's just say the name was Sarah. The woman was calling out Sarah, not really loud, but enough for people in the aisles nearby to hear, including me. I walked towards the voice and found the woman a few aisles down and more towards the center of the store. When I reached her, I asked if Sarah was her daughter. She looked concerned and said yes. I had a terrible feeling, and I said that I might have seen her daughter with a man and I thought they might be leaving. We both started sprinting towards the front of the store. The good thing is that this was probably less than a minute since I had seen the man. When we made it to the front of the store, we saw the man and the child at the self-checkouts area. He was buying one of the toys for her. The girl's mother started shouting, and the man claimed he was just trying to be nice and buy the toy for the girl, but he quickly tried to run away after realizing nobody would believe that. He ran out the door and was able to momentarily get away. I was just happy that the girl was okay and back with her mother. It turned out that the girl had wandered off from her mother to look at toys while her mom was shopping in another area of the store. The mother had believed that her child was nearby, but had actually wandered off much further. I also found out that the guy was located not long after this at all.
I remember this Walmart sort of where I live that used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure, but I think there were a lot of Walmarts that used to be open 24 hours. All the ones that I've been to in recent years close at like 10 p.m. now though. Maybe the reason is because of things happening like the story I'm about to tell you. This was several years ago, probably about 2014. I remember that I worked a job back then with all kinds of crazy hours. I never really knew when I would get off of work, and some nights were really late. One time, I got off of work at close to 3 a.m. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but also really hungry. On my way home, I stopped at the 24-hour Walmart to see what they had. There were no restaurants nearby that were still open, and I was just going to go down the snack aisle and maybe find something to drink as well. When I got inside, I made my way over to the food. The store was almost completely empty. I only saw a couple of employees here and there. When I got to the snack aisle, I browsed around for a little bit. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was hungry for. I often have a hard time deciding what to eat or where to get food from. I browsed for maybe 5 minutes, and then I had this feeling like I was being watched. It seemed a little strange, and I looked around. When I looked to the far end of the aisle, I saw a man standing there looking towards me. He was a sort of tall and skinny guy, wearing a black Adidas sweatshirt. When he saw me looking at him, he just kept standing there. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves in particular. He looked away from me, but I thought the guy seemed really weird. I went back to looking at the food on the shelves and tried to make up my mind. I wandered into the next aisle over. There was more food in that aisle. I was there for no more than 10 seconds, and I noticed the man creeping around the corner slowly and then looking at me again from the end of the aisle. This was really strange. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and then made my way towards the back of the store along the side. Once I was at the far back corner of the store, I decided to walk back to one of the main walkways, but when I got there, the man was already standing there looking at me. I started walking all around the store, and the man seemed to be following me. He kept slowly walking around the store, trailing me wherever I went, and it was really frustrating. His face was almost expressionless the entire time, and he never spoke a word. Finally, I said, "Forget this," and I went to the checkout area. There was only one check lane still open, and I told the cashier that some guy had been following me around the store. The man did not follow me into the checkout, but instead wandered off into the clothing area that was across from the check lanes. She just kind of said, "Thanks for letting us know," and agreed that it was weird. I just wanted to get home, eat something, and go to bed. After I was done checking out, I walked down towards the exit doors. I was sure to scan over and make sure that the creepy guy was not once again following me. I was really happy to see that he wasn't. When I made it out the door, I walked through the parking lot to my car. My car was parked a little ways from the doors.
It wasn't in the far back end of the parking lot, but it wasn't really that close either. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there were a few cars scattered all around, most of which I'm guessing were employees. Right as I was starting my engine, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sprinting at full speed from the Walmart headed straight for my car. It was the same guy that had been following me around. The way that he was running was so fast, like he was running for his life. But he wasn't running away from anything. He was running for me. There was a second or two where I was so confused that I just watched him. That was until I realized he was going to reach my car very quickly. Then I put my car into drive and got out of there. I pulled away probably just a couple of seconds before he would have reached me. He kept running though, all the way until I was out of the parking lot and on the street. Then I was easily able to get away. I was really confused who the man was, why he followed me around in the store, and why he had ran full speed at me when I was in my car. The lesson I learned from this was to not go back to Walmart in the middle of the night. I'm a female, and this story took place about 4 years ago. I was at Walmart shopping. Back then, I went there all the time. On this day, I was only getting like 2 or 3 things. It was nighttime. The store was somewhat busy though. I was able to find what I needed pretty easily, and I spent a total of maybe 10 minutes inside the store. At one point though, a man came up seemingly out of nowhere and introduced himself to me. He was about 5'8" and had grayish hair. He asked me my name and what I was shopping for. I saw that he didn't work there, and he came across to me as a little strange. I spoke with the man for maybe a minute, but I told him that I had to leave. He was sort of creeping me out. When I walked away, I headed straight for the checkouts, and when I got there, I saw that there was only 2 other people in the self-checkout area that had maybe 6 registers. I went to one and began scanning my items. That's when I saw the man again. It looked as though he had followed me all the way from the aisle we were in together, and that aisle was on the whole other end of the store. When he got to the self-checkouts, he did not go to an open one. Instead, he walked straight up to me. Then, he offered to pay for my items that I was getting. I told the man no thanks, and I asked him why he wanted to do that. He said he was just trying to be nice, and I said thanks, but I would buy it for myself. Then the man walked away. But he wasn't buying anything at all. He just seemed to walk out and leave the store. I finished checking out and then walked away to leave. When I got outside, the first thing I saw was the man standing there. He said hi to me once again. It scared me, but I said hi. The man asked if I wanted to come over to his house. It was really awkward. I told him sorry but no, and I started walking away. At first, the man took a couple of steps towards me and was walking with me, but after about 5 seconds or so, he stopped. He did not continue to follow me, and I got to my car and drove home. This experience was creepy, and should have been enough for me to not go back to that Walmart, but I thought it wasn't that big of a deal. So this guy was a bit of a creep. So what? I continued to go back to that Walmart. I went there several more times with no problems. Probably about a month after this had happened though, I was shopping at the same Walmart once again. I was doing some typical grocery shopping, and it was like 8 p.m. I was in one of the first food aisles of the store, and I noticed the man was there again. When I first saw him, I recognized him, but had actually forgotten about what had happened. I didn't know where I had seen him before at first, and it took my brain about 5 seconds to remember. When I did, I knew I needed to get out of there. As I was starting to walk away, I saw him look up and notice me. I left the aisle and walked as far away from him as I could to the complete other end of the store. I still had a couple of more things to get in the grocery department, but I wanted to wait until the man was gone. Running into him again was something I needed to avoid doing. In the meantime, I started just looking around at random items on the side of the store that I was now on. There were far less shoppers over there, and it was quiet. I slowly walked down a few aisles, just kind of taking my time. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He seemed to be heading in my direction, but was still really far away. I knew that I had to get out of there. I started walking away as fast as I could, and I went down different aisles to block myself from the man's view. I just set my basket with several items in it on the ground, and then left the store. There was no way I would have been able to check out without the man catching up to me. Once I left the store, I drove back home. After that, I did not return to that particular Walmart for some time. I believe that it was a total coincidence that I saw the man again there that night, but when he saw me, he was going to try to talk to me again for sure. He must shop there a lot, and I'm just glad that since then, I have never seen the guy.
I used to work at a Walmart a couple of years ago. This was my strangest experience. I mostly worked overnights and would stock shelves. It was an easy job for me. I would start at like 9 p.m., and at first the store would actually be open, but would close only like 2 hours into my shift. There would never be very many customers in that time anyways. A good number of us worked overnights because obviously Walmart is a really big store. On this one night, I happened to be working in the pets and supplies aisle, which is in the back end of the store. I had been working in that general area, but not that exact aisle earlier in the night, but by now it was about 11:30 p.m. Our store closed at 11, so we had been closed for 30 minutes now. As I was in the pet supply aisle, I was just stocking one of the shelves by myself. When the store closed, I would often put in headphones and listen to music while I worked, which is what I was doing. It helped work go by faster and easier for me. But out of nowhere, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It appeared as though somebody had walked by. I looked over, but they were now gone. I assumed it to be one of my coworkers, and once a few minutes went by, I kept working. Then, again, I saw somebody at the end of the aisle out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and this time the person did not walk away. It wasn't one of my coworkers, though. It looked like just some guy that I had never seen before. When I looked at him, he disappeared behind the next aisle. I got up and walked over and then looked down the next aisle. When I did, I saw the man disappearing out of that aisle and into the one after that. I took out my headphones and then radioed in on my walkie that I thought I saw somebody inside the store who wasn't supposed to be here. After that, I kept doing my work. About an hour later, I went to the back room. That area was pretty large in our store, but I was the only one back in that section at the time. When I was walking over there, I was sure that I saw the man again. I could see him hiding behind a box underneath one of the shelves there. I didn't stare at him, and I acted like I never saw him. I was going to walk past, but I decided to turn around and then go the other way instead. He was maybe 30 feet away. When I began walking back, I heard noises behind me, even with my headphones in. I started running for the exit to go back into the sales floor. I heard footsteps behind me when I did. When I got there, I opened the door and the man did not come out after me. I ran to find the nearest employee. That was Al, who was working in the electronics overnight at the time. I told him that I saw a man in the back, and he decided to come back and see. I had a bad feeling, and I wondered if the guy was dangerous. We both went back there anyways. When we opened the door to the back, we heard the sound of another door opening. It was coming from one of the doors we had back there that opened up to the outside. They were rarely used. We walked in further, just in time to see the guy walking out of the store and the door closing behind him. After that, he was gone. I still don't know how the man got inside. My only guess is he somehow avoided all employees and hid inside the store until after we had closed. I also wonder what he was going to do to me when he was hiding in the back and then followed me. Luckily, I quit that job not too long afterwards.
I'm quite an outdoorsy person, and so is my family, and we go on family camping trips every summer. I'm an experienced hiker and outdoorsman, and I frequently visit trails and parks, sometimes by myself, just to get my mind off things. I'm a teacher, so I have winter, summer, and spring break off, where I can take multiple day trips and camp somewhere. This occurred during winter break. It had snowed heavily, and the weather was cold, but in a magical Christmas way. I was going through a tough time in my life, so just to have something nice to do, I went out to a wooded area with my trailer to camp. It was a pleasant surprise to see that the park was void of people clearly not wanting to be in the cold weather. Me, on the other hand, had loved the snow and cold. It's just peaceful for me. I booked my campground spot for 3 nights. On the second night, it was amazing. The snow was nice and soft, and the moon was bright. It was perfectly bright enough to see almost the entire forest with a gentle blue glow. I just had to go on a night walk. That's how nice of a scene it was. The trails around the area go pretty far, so I left just after sundown. Most of the walk was uneventful. At the 2/3 mark of the trail, I heard a sound coming from the trees, a barely noticeable huff like something had been startled. I was surprised and immediately thought that it was another hiker. I looked in the direction of the noise, and if I were to tell you that I was so scared I heard ringing in my ears, it would be an understatement. I only saw his silhouette. He was tall, freakishly tall, at least 8 feet tall, long arms going down to his knees, standing upright like a person. He had weirdly proportioned features, almost like what you see in skinwalker stories, except I don't think that's what it was. He stood there like he was shocked that I was there, like he had never seen a person before. He wasn't aggressive, but more curious. I looked at him like I had never seen anything like him. We were almost parallel to each other in our reaction. He tilted his head slightly and leaned forward to get a better look. We were 20 feet away from each other, enough distance for me to at least get a head start if need be. I was still scared out of my mind, but I came to my senses enough to see that he wasn't aggressive, more curious than anything. I reached into my satchel and grabbed a piece of beef jerky and threw it at him. He took a step back and looked at it before slowly crouching down and grabbing it. He then started walking back into the dense forest. I wasted no time sprinting to the trailer, packing everything up and booking it out of there. I didn't even care about checking out and canceling my last day. Since then, I've never been able to go back to the park without thinking about him, who he was, if he was real or a figment of my tired imagination. It was my friend's 17th birthday. He's really into camping and various other outdoor activities. I was invited along with a few other friends, but because it was a really busy time of the year before graduation, only 4 of us ended up going. It was my friend and myself, and then his 13-year-old brother, who had also brought a friend. We camped at a lake out of town, a little bit into the woods. The spot we camped in was a small clearing. It wasn't an actual official camping spot, but it worked well nevertheless. We ended up cutting our own firewood from nearby trees. We didn't want to, but my friend forgot firewood, and we didn't have any cell phone service where we were. If you've ever cut down trees with smaller camping saws and hatchets, you know it takes a while, even with the 4 of us. Over the course of 4 hours, we acquired quite a collection of firewood, so when the sun started to set, we got hungry and wanted a fire. The fire took an hour to start. Thanks to the rain that morning, the woods was very damp. Eventually, with the help of some hand sanitizer in my backpack and the wood drying out from our other attempted fires, we got a decent fire going. I remember being really relieved. We were really hungry and managed to cook up some hot dogs and bacon. We were quite tired from the day of cutting down small trees, so we retired to our large tent pitched in the clearing. We fell asleep very fast, but around 2 in the morning, I woke up from a really cold and loud wind. I remember struggling around in my sleeping bag trying to find a comfortable position or trying to stay warm. I ended up just lying in bed for what seemed like hours, unable to sleep, until suddenly I heard a loud snapping of a branch, which I just put off as a small animal. I mean, we were in the middle of the forest, so it made sense at the time. Anyways, around 3 minutes later, I heard it again, but just a little closer. I thought about waking my friend or his brother up, but being me, I didn't want to be rude and wake them up just in case it was just an animal. That's when I heard distinct footsteps that sounded maybe 10 or 15 feet away. At this point, a chill ran up my spine, and I instantly thought, what if it's a cougar or a bear? As living where we were in Canada, it wouldn't be uncommon. Nevertheless, I was a little scared. Now, it's worth noting that my friends and I all had decent-sized knives on us, along with various other sharp objects, like our hatchet and compound bow. At this point, I kept hearing these footsteps very slowly, so I armed myself with my knife and put my friend's hatchet through my belt loop. I slowly unzipped the tent, slipped my shoes on, and decided to check it out. That probably wasn't the best choice looking back on it now, but I was trying my best to be brave. Gripping my knife, I creeped outside into the cold night. For a minute, I searched around the tent, finding nothing. So I decided to take a pee as long as I was up, and then after I was done, I started back towards the tent, and then heard another branch snap. Trying not to be loud, I called out, "Who's there?" No response, so I started to walk towards the sound when I saw the dark silhouette of a large, what looked like middle-aged man. I panicked and called out, "Who are you?" while raising my knife. The man rotated his body towards me before he turned around and sprinted off down the trail towards the parking lot. I stood there shocked for a minute. I didn't sleep much that night, waking up constantly. In the morning, I told my friend, his brother, and his brother's friend. They were very shocked by this, but my friend's brother told me around 1 in the morning he also heard footsteps and branches. Who knows what that man's intentions were for 4 teenagers camping in the woods? Maybe he was on drugs or another camper nearby, which I really doubt. What creeps me out the most about this incident is that in that area where he was standing, which I checked in the morning, was where I found my friend's brother's sweater on the ground. He claimed he didn't put it there, and I don't think the wind moved it there. In the summer of 1988, my aunt was a college student in Utah. She and her boyfriend, who later became my uncle, went camping with another couple in a park about 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City. They picked a spot, set up their tents, and planned to stay the night. It started raining hard early in the evening. A lot of people packed up and left, but my aunt and her group decided to wait it out. After a while, the rain stopped, so they made a small campfire and tried to enjoy the night. They talked, ate, and passed the time. Later, after it got dark, the rain started again. This time, the other couple didn't want to deal with it. They packed up and left, saying they'd rather drive back than sleep in the storm. My aunt and her boyfriend chose to stay. They put out the fire, got into their tent, and tried to settle in for the night. The rain kept coming down, steadily and loudly onto the tent. At some point, my aunt heard something that didn't match the sound of the rain. She said it was footsteps. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again. It sounded like someone walking nearby, not too far from their tent. She sat up and listened, and then said that she saw a quick flash of light through the tent, like a flashlight turning on and off. She said her first thought was that it might be a park ranger coming to tell them to leave because of flooding. So she called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped right away. That woke up my uncle. She told him what she had heard. They couldn't hear much over the rain, and that made it harder to tell what was going on. They talked quietly about what to do. They were far from other campers, and there wasn't anyone close by to help. They agreed that if they heard anything again, they would leave. So they stayed still and listened. Minutes went by, and nothing happened. After a while, they started to calm down and laid back down to try to sleep. Sometime later, both of them woke up at the same time. They heard the tent zipper slowly being unzipped. Someone was opening the tent from outside. She screamed, and my uncle reacted right away. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight that he kept next to him, and he swung it towards the door as hard as he could. The flashlight hit something solid, and they heard a person gasp, then the sound of someone running away into the rain. They got out of the tent and ran towards their truck, which was parked about half a mile away. It was still raining, and they didn't stop until they reached it. When they got there, they found one of the back tires had been slashed. They didn't have many options, so they got in and drove anyway. Somehow, by going slowly, they managed to make it out of the park and reached a gas station a few miles away. They used a payphone to call 911 and report what happened. The next day, they went back with the police to collect their things. The officers looked around the campsite and found footprints all around their tent. They said the prints appeared to belong to a man, but they never found out who it was. During a camping trip with friends years ago, we witnessed something we couldn't explain. We were sitting around the fire deep in the forest off a logging road in British Columbia. We were not drinking or smoking, as it was a dry trip for a friend. I noticed my good friend went silent and perked up like he was listening. He told us to shut up and listen. The forest was dead quiet with zero noise. Before, there had been frogs, birds, and regular forest sounds. He said something like, "Guys, there could be a cougar or bear around because the forest is silent. We might want to move to our cars." Before anybody could react, in the far tree line maybe 100 feet away, we saw something that completely put us all in shock. It was a small red orb, glowing like fire, producing its own light going between the trees. We watched it, flabbergasted. It was clearly passing behind and in front of trees. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then slowly faded. After about 10 seconds, the forest sounds resumed. We all just sat there in shock after that. We took a very quick look around, and there was no road or anything in the woods. It couldn't have been cars or any other vehicle. It freaked us out so much we left and found a campsite with people and stayed there. We still bring it up from time to time when we get together. It gave me nightmares for weeks. I have no clue what it could be, and it's a 50-50 shot if people believe it when we talk about it. A couple of additional points. We are all experienced campers and have done these trips for years. We've heard weird sounds, bright flashes in the sky, and encountered some sketchy people out in the bush before. Nothing unexplainable, but just wild stuff, so we knew how to react and think in these situations. The friend who noticed the lack of sound first is in the bush almost 6 months out of the year as he does forestry work, so he knows the woods more than anyone. He was terrified to go back to work for months after this experience. He never wanted to talk about it or mention it, as he said it made his hair stand up. So more about the light experience. When I say the forest was dead quiet, I mean completely quiet. I could hear the fire crackle lightly, but that was it. It was like the air had been sucked out of the forest itself. I could hear my heart beating. To go from so much sound to nothing instantly kicked in my fight or flight. It was primal. Something in the back of my head was like, this is a bad situation. Then, seeing that red light, it flickered and shined like a glass ball about the size of a beach ball filled with fire. It produced its own light, and a faint glow passed into the trees as it passed. It was traveling about walking speed between the trees. It was a heavy bushed area, so you'd hear someone walking through. Once my eyes locked onto it, I felt a fear I had never experienced. I'll say this, I almost died a couple of years back, and that wasn't as scary as this light. It was like my brain was trying to figure it out, but couldn't. Once it faded and the forest sounds resumed, everything in my body said to run. We barely said anything to each other as we all got up. We exchanged a few looks and words, and all confirmed what we saw. There were 6 of us. We decided to get a closer look, I guess out of the hopes there would be an explanation, but there wasn't. We couldn't explain it, and that made it worse. We left and found a paid campsite about 20 to 30 minutes away at around 1 a.m. In the morning, the owner of the campsite came by and greeted us, as people don't usually show up that late. We explained what happened sort of jokingly, as it seemed so strange. Her face turned to stone, and she was super serious after we explained. She explained that the forest we were in is an extremely old growth forest, which makes sense since my province has some of the oldest forests still standing in the world. She said it's not uncommon to hear stories like that. She asked a bunch of questions, and we talked about it for a while. I have no idea what or why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. I have no idea why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. Whenever we do talk about it, I have nightmares. Even just thinking about this and writing this gives me the creeps. In the mid to late 1970s, my parents were in a camping club with about 5 or 6 other couples, and they camped at various campgrounds together around the Midwest. One time, we went to this campground that had a little park near a large pond with a playground not far from the water. My sister and I were playing in a sandbox when I was around 10 years old, and she was a bit younger. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this boy, who was probably about 12 or 13, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans with patches on the knees, was standing in the sandbox a few feet from us. He had long black hair down to his shoulders and dark eyes. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, and my sister and I looked at him nervously, as he wasn't smiling and was staring down at us. He finally said something, and asked if we were brother and sister, and I told him we were. He asked where our camper was, and stupidly, without thinking, I told him the section of the campground my parents' club was camping in, which was about 2 blocks away. He then asked the name of one of the couples camping in our parents' club and if we knew them. I told him yes, and the boy said that they were his aunt and uncle, and he was going to surprise them later. He went on to say that he was camping with his dad, and he gestured vaguely in a direction on the other side of the pond. The kid squatted down close to my sister, and she backed up in the sand closer to me. He said, "Do you guys want to come to my camp? My dad brought tons of snacks, and I can give you marshmallows to roast if you want." I told him my parents already had marshmallows. This conversation went on for a bit, as he listed all the snacks that he had and wanted us to come and try them. My younger sister finally said she needed to go to the bathroom, which I took as my cue to get away from this weird kid who was really starting to make me feel uncomfortable, even at that young age. I told him, "We're going back now. We'll see you later when you come to your aunt and uncle's camper." He didn't get up when we got up, but instead leaned closer to us. He said, "There are bathrooms right down that road," pointing again past the pond. He added, "It's by where our camper is. You can take her there and stop by and get some candy for my dad." I told him there was a bathroom right over by the main office, which was just across the street from the playground, and I said we would just use that one. Suddenly, the boy jumped up, kicked whatever my sister and I had been building in the sand, and jumped out of the sandbox. He yelled, "You're so dumb! Who turns down free candy?" My sister and I rushed over to the office building, and I was fearful that he would follow us there. But after a few seconds of staring at us, he turned around and began to run down the path towards the other side of the pond. I took my sister into the men's room, she did her thing, and we cautiously looked around for the boy, who was nowhere to be seen, before we hurried back to our campsite. Once there, I told my parents about what happened, and our parents' friends happened to be sitting on the picnic table having coffee with them. We told them it was their nephew who was going to surprise them. Of course, they said they didn't have a nephew, and were a bit weirded out that someone knew who they were. My sister and I stayed at the campsite for the remainder of our time there, and of course, the creepy kid never did come to our campsite.
One night, in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or two away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, the only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours, and how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out. A few years ago, I visited some friends out in Oregon who lived on a secluded 300-acre property in the middle of nowhere. We were deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of nature. On the second evening, we were sitting around a fire pit enjoying each other's company as the sun was setting, making the whole sky orange. There was a total of 6 of us there, and 2 of my friends had brought their kids who were busy making s'mores. The others were having casual conversation, and I was comfortable in my folding chair leaning back and zoning out, just staring into the darkness. After a while, I noticed something strange. I kept staring at this one particular tree, trying to figure out what I was seeing. After I kept looking at it, I deciphered what looked like a giant hand wrapped around the trunk of the tree. I quickly turned to my friend Anthony, who was sitting closest to me, telling him to take a look at the tree. I motioned with my hand, telling him the direction to look. He also couldn't determine what he was seeing at first, but I told him to just keep looking and focus on it. Finally, he saw what I was seeing and whispered to me, "Is that a hand?" It blended in so well with the bark of the tree, but the more we looked at it, the more certain we were it was a massive hand gripping the tree. The fingers were thick, almost like tree bark. They had ridges and cracks, giving them a rough appearance. It was bizarre, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I felt goosebumps cover my arms as we both stared at the hand. It was about 15 meters away, and it didn't move at all. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The kids were laughing and joking around the fire, and we didn't want to alert anyone else in fear of scaring the kids. After 8 long minutes, the grip of the hand suddenly loosened and disappeared behind the tree into the darkness of the forest. The movement of the hand disappearing confirmed to both Anthony and I that it wasn't an illusion. Anthony and I looked at each other wide-eyed and speechless, feeling that we had seen something that didn't belong in our world. Later that night, we finally got up from our chairs, and we wanted to check out the area where we had seen the hand. We walked towards the tree. When we reached it, we both paused, taking in its massive trunk. It was at least 2 feet in circumference, and it was hard to imagine how something with a hand could be that big. I inspected the ground around the base of the tree, looking for any signs of footprints, scratches, or anything that could explain what we had seen. But there was nothing. No imprints in the dirt, and no smell like you would expect from a wild animal. I've heard tons of stories of man-like creatures residing in the deep woods, and I'm a believer now. Whatever that thing was bigger than any regular human, and based off the size of the tree that its hand was wrapped around, it had to have been huge. This is a true story of something that happened to me and a few friends a couple of decades ago when I was still a teenager. My family had just moved from a big city to a quiet area in England, basically in the middle of nowhere. My new house was half a mile from an old ruin of a castle called Barry Pomeroy. The locals always said that the castle was haunted, but tours of the castle were regularly given during the daytime, so I didn't really believe it. One night, a few of my friends and I thought it would be fun to explore the castle at night. It was around 9 p.m. when we went to check it out. There was still plenty of light to see, but the summer sky was darkening. We walked up the valley, taking the steep footpath to the castle's gatehouse. We knew that we could sneak in pretty easily by climbing over a ruined wall, and at this point, they didn't employ guards yet to keep people from sneaking in at night. Once inside, we moved through the old dining room and climbed the ramparts to take in the views. It was dark by now, and the moonlight cast long shadows everywhere, making it a bit creepy. We were having fun though, and eventually decided to check out the dungeon. As we descended the stone staircase, we noticed tiny candles flickering on the steps. Tours for the day had been finished for many hours now, and the candles were freshly lit. At the bottom, we found what looked like a shrine. There were candles arranged in a circle, and something was drawn on the wall behind it. I don't remember the details of the drawing, but it felt eerie. The candles and the thought of someone else being in the dungeon area made us uneasy, so we quickly went back up the staircase. When we reached the top of the staircase, I realized my friend Alan was missing. I called out his name, and after looking around, we saw a figure walking around on the ramparts. He must have chickened out and never came down to the dungeons, even though we thought he was with us. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. Alan was coming up the stairs after lagging a bit behind and was asking why I was shouting his name. Sure enough, I turned to see Alan standing behind me now. My heart dropped as we looked back up towards the ramparts. The shadowy figure I had seen that I thought was Alan was still up on the ramparts, watching us. It didn't move for a moment, then slowly slipped behind a pillar and vanished. We were all on edge now and decided it was best to leave. We hurried back the way we had gotten in, climbed over the wall and headed towards the footpath through the woods. As we walked, I glanced back at the castle. It loomed in the darkness, and I noticed the figure again. This time, it was perched on top of the wall, moving along it as if it was following us. As quickly as we could, we hurried down the path, trying to keep our footing in the uneven ground. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I looked back again. The castle seemed even more imposing now. This time, when I looked back, I saw a faint blue light glowing on the wall. It drifted slowly, then disappeared over the edge of the castle. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. That was the first and last time I ever experienced something I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just some guy trying to scare us off, but I couldn't shake the image of that blue light fading away. It looked so supernatural, and I began believing that the castle indeed was haunted. When I was about 13, my family lived in a remote area in the middle of nowhere, Canada. One winter night, I decided to unwind in the hot tub on our deck. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and the world was quiet, blanketed in knee-deep snow from a recent snowfall. As I sat there watching the trees and listening to the night sounds, something caught my eye. Emerging from the darkness of the woods was a massive wolf. It was unlike any wolf I had ever seen. Its silver coat shimmered in the moonlight, and its green eyes pierced through the night. The wolf walked along the fence that bordered the property. For a moment, it paused and locked eyes with me. I was up on the deck, and the wolf was far away below, but I was still terrified, and I sat as still as possible, waiting to see what would happen. The wolf continued on its path towards the barn where our horses were kept. As it approached the barn, there was a light on the outside on the other side that illuminated the inside just a bit. The barn was dark inside, but I could clearly see the outline of the wolf moving through the barn. Halfway through the barn, the shape of the wolf totally shifted. It was like it morphed into something more human-like, although it was big with broad-shouldered, and seemed to stand at least 7 feet tall. The horses weren't skittish at all and were completely silent, which was strange. The tall figure rounded the corner, but did not appear on the other side of the barn. I strained to see if it would reemerge from behind the barn at some point, but it never did. It must have just vanished into the darkness on the other side of the barn. I had no idea if there was a trick going on with the light and shadows inside the barn, but I had no idea what I had just seen, and I had never seen a wolf that big. Later, I found that my brother had experienced something similar. He told me that he woke up one night feeling a strange sensation, like he was being watched. When he looked out of his window, he saw the same large wolf walking away from his window. I have yet to see the wolf again, and I wonder if I ever want to.
I was 14 when this happened, and it was the middle of February on a Friday night. My friend Tyler and I were at my house watching random videos and playing games in the basement. It was already late, maybe around 11. My phone buzzed, and it was a text from a girl named Megan who lived a few miles away. She asked if we wanted to come hang out for a bit because her parents were gone and she was bored. We decided to sneak out without telling my parents because they would have said no for sure. We lived in the country in Southern Virginia, so walking places wasn't unusual for us. Megan's house was about 4 miles away. We had walked there before during the day, but never that late at night, and definitely not when it was that cold. It was around 0 degrees outside. We grabbed coats and gloves and headed out. To get to her house, we had to walk up my gravel driveway, which is long, then turn onto a narrow road with no streetlights. After about a mile, the road passes a small pond and then meets an old railroad line that hasn't been used in years. The tracks run straight for a few miles and cut past a small row of trailers and a couple of scattered houses before you reach the woods near Megan's place. The walk there was quiet. Snow covered most of the ground and the sky was completely dark. There wasn't even a moon that night. About halfway there, we passed a small white house near the tracks. The guy who lives there keeps several hunting dogs. At night, he locks them in a large fenced kennel beside his yard. Every time someone walks by, they start barking like crazy. We stayed on the far side of the tracks when we went past. The dogs heard us and started going wild, slamming into the fence and howling. Tyler laughed and we jogged a little bit until we were farther down the tracks and the noise faded. After that, we kept walking and we reached Megan's house a little before midnight. We stayed there for a few hours just talking and watching TV. Around 3 a.m. we decided to head back home. The walk back started the same way as before, quiet and dark. When we got close to the area with the trailers and the dog kennel, we slowed down. The dogs were already barking again. They weren't barking towards the tracks where we usually walked. They were facing the trailers across from them. They kept jumping against the fence like they were trying to get at something. We stopped about 50 yards away. Tyler said he didn't like it and thought something was over there. I told him it was probably a raccoon or another animal messing around near the trailers, and we kept walking. We were almost past the last trailer when Tyler suddenly grabbed my jacket. He gasped and pointed towards the bushes near the corner of the trailer. Right as I turned my head, someone lunged out from the dark like they were trying to grab me. I only saw the shape of a person moving fast. We ran without saying anything. We didn't slow down until we were off the tracks and running up my driveway. We went straight inside and locked the door. My parents were asleep upstairs and had no idea that we were gone, so we didn't want to tell them anything. We stayed in my room and talked about what had happened. Tyler kept saying someone had been crouched next to the trailer watching us before they jumped out. I brought my dog into the room and shut the door. We finally tried to sleep around 4 a.m. I was half asleep when I opened my eyes and looked towards the window beside my bed. A face was right there on the other side of the glass. A man was staring into the room. I yelled as loudly as I could. My dog started barking and jumping at the window. By the time my dad rushed into the room and turned on the light, the person outside was gone. My dad grabbed a flashlight and checked the yard while my mom called the police. They drove around the road and tracks for a while but didn't find anyone. The next morning, I texted Megan and told her what had happened. She replied a few minutes later and asked if it was near the trailers by the railroad. Apparently, someone had broken into one of those trailers that same night. No one ever figured out who it was. After that, Tyler and I avoided walking those tracks at night. This happened when I was 16. It wasn't that long ago, but it's the one night I still think about when I can't sleep. Back then, I had just figured out how easy it was to sneak out. My parents went to bed early, and my window opened right into the side yard. I hadn't been caught doing it at all yet, so I snuck out at night quite often. That night, I texted a guy I'd been talking to from school. We weren't officially dating, but we liked each other. He lived a few streets away and suggested we meet behind the middle school near his house. There was a large soccer field behind the school. At the far end, there was a line of trees and a small playground. A walking trail ran along the side of the field and connected to a neighborhood behind it. We met up around midnight and sat near the edge of the field where the grass met the gravel track. From there we could see the back of the school and the parking lot lights, but it was dark enough where we were that nobody would notice us unless they walked right over. We had brought a vape and were passing it back and forth, talking about random stuff. After a while, I heard footsteps on the gravel. We both looked towards the trail that ran behind the school. A guy walked past the parking lot lights and onto the path. I remember he had a hoodie on and he was pushing a bike next to him. He didn't look at us. He just kept walking along the path and disappeared behind the corner of the school. We didn't think much about it. It's not like we owned the place, so we kept talking and messing around like before. Maybe 10 minutes later, we heard the same sound again of gravel crunching. This time, the guy came back from the same direction he had just gone. He walked slower when he reached the part of the path that faced the field. He stopped and stood there on the path. It felt like he was looking out across the field, maybe at us, maybe not. We were far enough away that I couldn't be sure. After maybe 30 seconds, he started walking again, but instead of staying on the path, he stepped off the gravel and onto the grass. That's when we decided to leave. There's a narrow trail that cut through the trees that led into a neighborhood with a bunch of small houses. It was darker that way, but at least there were more streets and places to go. We grabbed our stuff and started walking fast towards the trees. I kept looking back, but it was hard to see anything across the field. The trail through the trees was almost completely dark. When we finally reached the other side, we came out onto a small street with houses and porch lights. I felt a lot better immediately. We started walking down the sidewalk, trying to figure out which way would take us back to the main road. We were talking again, laughing a little about how paranoid we were. We turned around at the end of the street, right where the sidewalk met the road. The same guy was standing there with his bike. He was just standing in the middle of the sidewalk, looking right at us. Then he jumped on his bike and began riding towards us as fast as he could. I remember saying, "Go," and we both took off. We didn't even think about where we were going. We just started running down random streets. We cut between houses, jumped a couple of fences, and ran through someone's yard because we knew he couldn't follow us there on his bike. After a few minutes, we ducked behind a parked truck in someone's driveway and just crouched there for a while catching our breath. Eventually, we stood up and looked around. The street was empty. We slowly walked back towards the main road so I could head home. Lucky for us, we both made it home safe that night. But I'll never forget the feeling of my heart sinking when we saw the bike guy blocking our way out. By far one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. This happened when I was 17. I grew up in a small town, and my parents were strict about curfews. One night, I snuck out to meet some friends at a guy's house about 2 miles away. I'd done it a few times before and had never had any trouble. Around 2 a.m., I decided to head back to my house. There were 2 ways home. One was along the main road, which looped around town and took about 40 minutes. The other was a shortcut through a stretch of woods and an empty field that cut the walk almost in half. I'd taken the shortcut plenty of times, so I went that way. My phone battery was already low when I left. I turned the flashlight on anyway as I crossed the field towards the tree line. It was quiet out there as there were no houses nearby, no cars, just the sound of insects and the wind moving through the trees. As soon as I stepped into the woods, my flashlight on my phone went out as it had died. I knew the trail well though. There were a few things I always used to make sure I was still on it. A big rock near the entrance, a fallen log you had to step over, a big pine tree halfway through, so I knew where I was going and I just had to slow down a bit without the light. I kept walking slowly, using my feet to feel the path. After maybe another minute, I smelled cigarette smoke ahead of me and I stopped walking immediately. I had no idea where the smoke was coming from though, so I just continued on my way, hoping I wouldn't bump into this person. A few seconds later, I heard a twig snap and then another. The sounds were behind me and getting closer. Whoever was out there smoking had started moving also now, so I instinctively ran. I couldn't see where I was going too well, and branches were hitting my arms and legs as I pushed through them. At some point, I must have left the trail because the ground got uneven and thick with plants. Because of this, I tripped and fell down hard. I stayed there on the ground. I banged my knee on the fall, so I just sat there for a bit trying to barely breathe. The footsteps kept coming. I heard someone mumbling something under their breath. I couldn't make out any words though. Then, suddenly, a flashlight clicked on. The beam moved slowly through the trees. I kept my head down and stayed still. The light passed a few feet away from me, then swept back again. After a few seconds, the flashlight switched off again, and I heard footsteps gradually continuing away from me. I waited a few more minutes before I got up. The problem was that I had no idea where the trail was anymore. I had run straight off it, but I figured if I kept moving in one direction, I'd eventually reach the road. So I started walking slowly, trying not to make any noise, and eventually I found the trail again. I knew the exit wasn't far now, and if I could reach the fence at the end, I'd be out by the streetlights. A few minutes later, I saw a faint light through the trees. Relief hit me right away as I sped up to get back to the street and the lights. But as I got closer, I saw something standing right at the opening of the trail, a silhouette of a person blocking the exit of the trail. I stopped walking and weighed my options. Maybe it was someone else, but I knew most likely it wasn't. I was tired and scared and just wanted to get out of there. I was a big framed boy standing 6 feet tall, so I decided to run for it. I took off down the trail straight towards the exit in a full sprint, not really sure yet if I would try to barrel through the person or juke them if they were hostile. The figure got larger as I got closer, but still didn't move. Right as I reached them, they shifted suddenly towards the edge of the trail, trying to grab me or something as I juked and kind of squeezed by them. I felt a hand brush the back of my hoodie like they had tried to grab it. I jumped over the small fence gate at the end of the trail and ran onto the road under the streetlight. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block near the first house. When I finally looked back, the trail entrance was empty. I got home, climbed back through my window, and didn't sleep much that night. I never used that shortcut again. Not during the day, and definitely not at night when I would sneak out. This happened when I was a junior in high school. Back then, my friends and I had a routine on weekends. We would tell our parents that we were staying at different houses, but we actually ended up at the same place. One of the guys in our group lived outside of town in an older house with a lot of land around it. It was far enough away that no one ever really bothered us there, and his parents were always doing something else, but also didn't even care if we were around. There were usually 7 or 8 of us, mostly couples and a few other friends. We'd watch movies, play games, eat junk food, and stay up most of the night. Late one Friday night, we got hungry and decided to drive to a place that was open all night near the highway. It was about 10 minutes away and had a couple fast food places and a gas station. We piled into one car and headed out. On the way back, we were on a long, dark road that led towards the house. There weren't many homes out there. As we drove around a bend, we passed a man riding on a bicycle on the side of the road. It was after midnight, so that alone made it strange that someone was biking out there. There weren't any streetlights out as well, and it was cold that night. He turned his head and stared right at the car as we went by. Everyone in the car noticed it. Someone even said something like, "Why is that guy biking out here this late?" We laughed about it for a minute, but it left a weird feeling. A few minutes later, we pulled into our friend's driveway and parked behind the house like we always did. The back door was the one that we used since it was closest to where we parked. We went inside and started eating in the family room. Maybe half an hour later, there was a knock at the back door. The guy who lived there looked at us and asked if anybody was expecting someone. No one was. His parents were out of town that weekend, so it was just us there. He walked over to the door, but didn't open it. There was a small window next to it, so we looked through that first. Then he stepped back and he said quietly, "It's the guy from the road." Immediately, a few of us got up and moved farther into the room. I remember my heart beating really fast. I went halfway up the stairs with 2 of my friends so we could still hear what was happening. From the stairs, I could see the door, but not the person outside. Our friend cracked the door just a little, but kept the chain on. The man was standing there right on the porch. He said he was thirsty and asked if he could have some water. His voice sounded calm, but something about the situation felt wrong. The road where we saw him was a few miles away. I couldn't understand how he had ended up at the house, and how he even knew it was there since it sat back from the road. The guy who lived there said to wait a second and went to the kitchen. He filled up a glass in the sink. Then he went back to the door and opened it just enough to pass the glass through the gap. The man took it and drank the whole thing while standing there. Nobody else said anything, we were all just watching. When he finished, our friend told him he needed to leave. The man handed the empty glass back and said thanks. Then he stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house towards the front. As he went, he looked through the windows. I could see his face pass by the living room window looking at everyone for a moment before he disappeared. Maybe he really did just want water. But the thing that still bothers me is how he found that house. The driveway was long enough that you couldn't really see the place from the road unless you already knew that it was there. And the last time we saw him on the road, he was several miles away. Our conclusion after talking about it more that night was that he had some sort of malicious plan in mind, but he might have been scared away once he saw the number of people that were in the house. When the car passed, he might have just seen the two girls in the front seat of the car and thought that he could get lucky or something worse. The summer I turned 14, I stayed with my cousin for a few weeks in the town where she lived with her dad. It was a small town with one grocery store, one gas station, and a park by the river. At the time, it felt exciting to be somewhere different, even if it was quiet. One night, we were bored and couldn't sleep. It was some time after midnight. We decided that it would be fun to sneak out and walk to the river trail. Her dad already had gone to bed, and the house was dark. We slipped out the back door and walked down the gravel road behind the house. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, talking about random things and laughing because we thought we were being rebellious. About halfway to the trail, I noticed someone behind us on the road. The guy was wearing dark clothes and a cap pulled low with his hands in his pockets. Neither of us said it out loud at first, but we both had the same feeling that he was following us. We turned into a side street and ducked behind a row of parked cars in front of an empty house. We waited behind the car crouching. After maybe a minute, the man walked past the corner. He slowed down and looked around for a second. Then he kept going down the main road. After he disappeared from sight, we ran the whole way home. The next morning, her dad was watching the local news while making coffee. We were in the kitchen when the story came on. A woman had been attacked late the night before on the same stretch of road we had walked on. It happened around the same time we were out. According to the report, someone assaulted her while she was walking home. My cousin and I just stood there looking at each other. We never told her dad about sneaking out that night, and we didn't want to talk to the police either. At the time, we were scared we'd get in trouble for leaving the house. Looking back now, I wish we would have said something, as maybe it would have helped that woman out.
I go to Target all the time. It's the main place where I do most of my shopping. The store has just about everything you could want, from groceries to electronics. It's also nicer in my opinion than competitors like Walmart and Costco. Anyways, this is something that happened last year that caused me to not go there for a while. It happened one night when I went to do my normal grocery shopping. I think I got to the Target a little bit later than I usually do. It was maybe like 8 o'clock at night. When I got inside, I got a cart and started walking around the store getting things. At one point, I remember that I was towards the back corner of the store in the grocery department. That's when I first noticed this one woman that was inside there. This woman was somewhat short, thin, and had long, kind of messy hair. What stood out about her the most was that she was just standing in like the exact corner of the store and staring at me. She didn't have a shopping cart or basket and wasn't holding anything. It just seemed really odd. I was getting something back there, maybe 30 feet away from her. I spent maybe a minute in the area, and when I was leaving, I walked sort of past her. I glanced and noticed that she was still staring at me. This was really weird. I mean, she hadn't really moved at all. What was she doing? As I walked away, I could feel her still staring at me. I certainly didn't know her at all. I moved on to another section of the grocery department. From there, I continued my shopping. Probably 10 minutes or so went by, but that's when I noticed her again. I was in an aisle, and there were a few people scattered around here and there, but I noticed a ways behind me, like 30 feet or so, was the same woman. I didn't really look at her to see if she was staring at me again or not. I really just noticed that she was there. I kept shopping like normal and was soon in another aisle. I saw the woman there as well. This was pretty weird to me. I still ignored it though, and didn't let it bother me. Soon, I was done shopping. I then walked to the front of the store towards the checkouts. When I was walking there, in a more open area, I noticed that the woman was trailing me. She was remaining a sort of far ways behind me, but was certainly following me. I really didn't know what to make of this. I got in line and waited to check out. When I did, the woman did not get in line behind me, but instead stood just inside of the clothing section, which was adjacent to the checkouts. Soon I was able to pay for my items and then be on my way. I walked out of the store, not bothering to look around and see if the woman was still following me. And I didn't notice her at all until I had made it to my vehicle. I got to my car, which was a smaller SUV. I opened up the back rear door and put several bags of groceries inside of it. That's when I saw the woman again. This time, she was just standing in an empty parking space, which was across and one over from my car. So she was once more maybe 30 feet or so away. I don't know if that's exactly how far away she was, but it's just my estimation. Anyways, I thought for just one brief second about talking to her. I was curious as to why she was being so weird, but I decided not to. I didn't know what she was capable of, and so I finished unloading the things and closed my trunk. Then I walked around to my driver's door and got inside. But just after I got inside my car, I heard the rear hatch open up. I looked back and saw the woman literally climbing into the back of my SUV. I asked her what on earth she was doing. At this point, she started climbing over the rear seats of my car, heading straight for me. It was a terrifying moment. When that happened, I decided to just leave my car. Again, I had no idea what she was planning to do. I took my keys out of the ignition and then got out of my driver's door. Then I basically just ran back inside of Target. The woman did not leave my car and chase after me. When I was safely inside, I called the police and reported the incident to them. I waited inside Target without seeing the woman until the police arrived. When they got there about 10 minutes later, I spoke with them briefly. Then they went to my car to look for the woman. She had left my car, but was found a short distance away, trying to break into another vehicle. After the police had apprehended her, I went back and looked at my car. Overall, it was fine, but inside, she took all of my groceries out of the bags and opened several things. It was really weird. This incident caused me to not go to Target for a while, but I have since returned. I really don't know what that woman's problem with me was. I used to work at a Target department store as a cashier. I worked there for almost 6 months, but ended up quitting. The scariest thing that happened was one random night when I was working a night shift. I don't remember what time I started or exactly when I got off either, but I was working as a cashier and helping countless customers. The store was decently busy, and there was a steady amount of people at my register. I remember towards the end of my shift, this guy with a beard came into my line. I don't recall what he bought, and we had a very normal interaction. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary, but I did remember him just because of his beard. It was very long and memorable. So anyways, he walked away and then I helped the next person in line behind him. Probably 10 minutes or so after this, it was time for my final break of the night. I turned off the light to my check lane, helped the final customer, and then left. I walked to the front of the store and went down a quiet hallway to where our break room was. The break room had several tables, chairs, a refrigerator, and a TV. I sat down at a table and was the only person inside the entire break room at that time. So I just went on my phone like usual and caught up Snapchatting with friends and whatnot. About 5 minutes later, I noticed somebody come into the break room out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't really see them. The person then walked over and sat down right next to me at the table. When I looked up, I saw that it was the same bearded man from just minutes before. I was so confused as to what he was doing here. He didn't work at Target, so why would he be in the break room? The man told me that I had to go with him. I was asking him, "What are you talking about?" He said that we should go right now and was pointing towards the exit. There was an employee's entrance down the hallway from the break room. I asked the guy who he was, and he said that he would tell me later. Then the man stood up and said once more to leave with him. Now, obviously, this seemed crazy to me, and I had no intentions of doing so. Then he started to grab my arm to get me to stand up as well. I stood up but resisted, and I tried to start to walk away from him. When this happened, I suddenly heard the door open from behind. I looked back and saw one of my coworkers, Brian, entering the break room. He looked very confused by what he was seeing. I remember that the man tried pulling my arm to get me to go with him again, but I was still resisting. That's when Brian asked what was going on. The man finally let go of my arm and then ran away towards the employee's exit. I went over to Brian and told him the story. I said that I was so happy he walked in when he did. Looking back, I don't know what would have happened if he didn't. Brian went to see if the guy had left, and he did. Another coworker came into the break room a short time later, and we all talked about what happened. After that, I went back to work and finished up my shift. For the next several days, everything was fine. I worked one other time without any kinds of problems, but I remember that my next shift after that, I was working at night again. Things had been going by like normal. I had a few customers in my checkout line at probably about 9 o'clock. I remember that I casually looked up and suddenly saw the same bearded man in line. He didn't have any items with him. I had a really bad feeling about this. When it was his turn, I told him that I was going to call the police if I ever saw him again. The man laughed a little and said that he would be waiting for me when I got off. Then he just walked away and left. I went straight for my manager after that and told her about what had happened. We decided to call the police. They came out and we spoke with them about the situation. Then they went into the parking lot and actually found the man standing in the parking lot near my vehicle. It gave me the creeps when I heard that. I'm really glad that we called the police. I ended up getting a restraining order against the guy and haven't seen him since. This is something that took place many years ago when I was a child. I believe I was about 7 years old. One day I went shopping with my mother and younger sister at Target. It was a common place for my entire family to go and get whatever. When we got there, my sister was sitting in the shopping cart and my mother was pushing it. Then I was walking alongside her. We walked around the store getting things for a while. I remember that we got to like the back end of the store, sort of near the corner. I don't remember what department it was, but it was not the groceries, I know that. So as my mother was shopping around, somehow I wound up in like the next aisle over from her. I'm not sure if I was distracted by something on the shelf or what, but I was still really close by. That's when I saw a Target employee approaching from I'm not even sure where. It was a man wearing the classic red shirt and khakis. He approached me, and I just remember he asked if I wanted to see something really cool. Of course I did, and I said yes. Then he told me to follow him and started walking away. But he didn't go very far before there were these doors that led to the back room. I had always seen these doors in stores, and I knew that I wasn't allowed to go past them. I had also always wondered what was behind those doors and what was in the back room of the store. So he opened them and told me that I could go in. I was really curious, and I also thought that it was so cool that he was showing me this. I walked in after him, and then he closed the doors behind us. It was almost like he was giving me a tour, and he was pointing at stuff and telling me what it was for. I remember that he said that's where they kept all the items before they went out into the store. We continued to walk farther into the back a little bit. By now, I had sort of forgot about going back to my mother and sister. I was just really interested in what I was seeing. I felt like it was okay that I was back here because this guy worked at Target. Then I remembered that this other guy, who also appeared to be an employee, walked over to us. He said hi, and then the three of us kept walking. Then I remember seeing this other door that led to outside. The men told me that I should see where the deliveries were made and said that I could go outside. This is when I first had a bad feeling. For some reason, I hadn't found it to be a problem to walk in the back with the man, but now that I was being asked to actually go outside, it felt completely different. I knew that my mother would be upset if I left the building. I stopped, even though they were encouraging me to leave. I said no thanks, and then started to walk back. My mother was probably looking for me, and I said that I had to go back to her. I remember the two guys were saying it was fine and she was okay with it, but I knew that they hadn't spoken to her, so I got more suspicious then. I started to kind of walk back towards the back doors that we had come in through. That's when one of the men started walking towards me aggressively. That was enough to make me start running away. I sprinted as fast as I could towards the back doors. I heard the guy running right after me. I remember that I just barely reached the doors and opened them. The man reached me right as I did, but my mom was right on the other side of the doors and saw me come out of there. The man noticed this and then turned and ran away. My mom asked me why I had been in the back room. When I told her the story, she went back there herself with me to see if the men had gone, but they weren't back there anymore. The back door that had been open leading to outside was also now closed. I remember my mother found one of the store managers and it led to a big thing. I don't really remember much else after that. Looking back though, I'm just really glad that I realized when I did to go back to my mother. I don't think either of those men really worked at Target at all. For some background to this story, I'm a female. This happened when I went to Target last year to do some shopping. I was going to be getting quite a few things. I went to Target maybe once a week on average and got groceries and other stuff. Sometimes I would spend a long time there, and it's been one of my favorite stores for a long time. I went there one night after work, and it was maybe 7 p.m. or so. I was shopping around, getting a lot of the normal things that I usually did. At one point, I was sort of in the middle of the store. It was at the start of the clothing section, but also near some aisles with other things like games and sporting goods. It was at that moment when this man approached me. He said hi, and then said that he had to show me something funny. He said to follow him quick. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I did follow him. I left my cart and we only went like one aisle just around the corner. He showed me some Lego product on the shelf and made a joke about it, but I didn't really understand it. I don't even remember exactly what he said, but overall I was just kind of confused. I just know that I laughed to be nice, and it was kind of awkward. Then the guy said that's all and he told me to have a good night. So I walked back over to my cart and then continued with what I was doing. I didn't really think much of the interaction after that. I would say I spent maybe 10 more minutes inside the Target shopping. Then I checked out and left. I got back to my house and then unpacked everything that I got. At this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. So that very same night, after I went to bed, I woke up sometime. I'm a really light sleeper, so I didn't really know what woke me at first, but I just knew that it was a little bit after midnight. I was going to just go right back to bed, but then I heard a noise coming from the other room. That made me completely awake and more alert. I listened to the noise and couldn't tell what exactly it was at first. I was so curious, so I got up and left my bedroom. Then I moved towards the back of the house where the living room was. That's where the noise was coming from, and right when I entered the room, I saw someone at the window. I couldn't tell any details about them, but could just see that someone was right outside the window. I stopped where I was, just about a step into the room, and I didn't go any farther in. Then I saw that there appeared to be another guy at my back door. 2 people were outside of my house. To me, it seemed like the noise was actually coming from the back door area. It wasn't very loud, and I didn't really know what exactly they were doing. I ran out of the room and into a small closet in my hallway. I decided to hide in there, and then I called the police on my cell phone. I said that I thought 2 people were possibly trying to break in. Now, I didn't turn on any lights or anything when I got up, so I don't think the men knew that I was awake. As I was hiding in the closet, I realized that. I considered leaving the closet to turn on a light and see if that would cause the men to leave my property, but I couldn't gather up the courage to do so. I was hidden in the closet and did not want to get out. Inside of it though, I could barely hear the noises. If I was completely still,
I could just sort of hear them. They seemed to come and go, and that went on for the next several minutes. But the police ended up getting there much faster than I thought they would. Probably 5 minutes after I made the 911 call, I heard more louder noises. At first, I was scared by it, until I realized that the people talking were police. I left the closet at that point and realized that nobody had broken in. After that, I went to the window and saw the police with 2 men. It was at that point that I recognized one of the guys. He was the man that talked to me earlier that same night when I was at Target. I was really confused as to what was going on. The police told me that the men appeared to be attempting to break into my house. I told them how I had seen one of the guys at Target and stuff. There was a whole investigation done, and I found out some shocking details. An AirTag was found inside of my purse. It had been in my shopping cart when I was at Target. The first guy must have distracted me while the other guy put the AirTag inside of my purse. Why they chose me, I don't know, but I'm really glad that I woke up so easily and called the police before the men were able to get inside of my house. I used to work at Target. This is something that happened back in 2017. Back then, I was a senior in high school and working as a cashier part-time. I would work a lot of afternoon to night shifts, and there were some other people around my age who also worked there. I made a few friends with some coworkers over the months that I was at Target. There was one coworker in particular, though, named Evan. He always seemed kind of strange, and it wasn't just me that thought that. Some coworkers talked to me about some weird things that he would say, or strange things that he would do. He worked in another department of the store, I can't remember where, but aside from saying strange things or somewhat creepy things, he would sometimes just stare at people. One thing I noticed in particular was he would sit in his car across from mine a lot. He was around my age, so we would often work similar shifts, and I would always park in the same general area of the parking lot. Many times when I got off of work and walked out to my car, I would get in only to see Evan already sitting in his car, and his car would be facing mine. He would often just be sitting in his car, kind of staring at me. I would usually leave pretty quickly then, and I figured it to be a coincidence at first. I mean, it didn't happen every time, but it did happen quite a bit. One time though, I knew for a fact that Evan got off of work about 3 hours before I did. When I got to my car that night, I was shocked to see him sitting in his car still, and he was staring at me. I quickly left like usual, and he stayed there. I figured that maybe his car was broken or something. I really didn't know why he was often there like that, but I wasn't jumping to any conclusions. One of the next times that I worked though, Evan did not work. Everything went by pretty normal. I think I got off at 9 p.m. and then clocked out and left to head home. During this time, I lived with my parents, almost 10 minutes away from the Target. When I got back to my car, I saw Evan was once again sitting in his car across from mine and looking at me. He wasn't wearing his work clothes and hadn't worked at all today, so I found this to be odd. But like most times, I just started up my car and then left. However, when I left this time, Evan actually left right after me. After leaving the parking lot, I went onto the road and then merged onto the highway. Evan was still following me in his car at this point. I hadn't noticed this happening before, so I drove most of the way home, not knowing if he was following me or not. I mean, I didn't know where he lived. When I turned off the highway though, he did as well. I drove all the way to my street, which was pretty close by. After pulling onto my street, Evan did the same. Now I knew that I couldn't go to my house, so I drove past it. Then, when I reached the end of my street, I turned and went back onto a busier road. I remembered then to go to a police station when you're being followed, so when I got back onto the highway, I put in directions to the nearest one, and Evan continued to follow me all the way there until I pulled in. Then, at that point, I saw him start to turn around on the road in his car. I stayed in the parking lot of the police station for several minutes, and then left to go back home. I felt much better now that he wasn't following me anymore. When I was driving back home, I was careful to look behind me and stuff. I didn't notice him at all. Soon, I had reached my street. When I pulled onto it though, there was this car parked on the side of the road. I saw it start to move after I passed it, and I realized that it was Evan.
He must have somehow known this was my street. I didn't know what to do, so I just pulled into my driveway. Then I got out of my car as quickly as I could and ran inside the house. When I got in, I saw Evan's car on the side of the road out front. I didn't hesitate and I called the police. But then, just about a minute later, he left. The police came out and I told them of the situation. I could give them a lot of details about Evan because I knew his name and where he worked. After that, the next time that I worked at Target, I reported what happened to my manager. I learned that Evan had been fired recently from Target for inappropriate behavior, and not long after that, I found out that he had actually followed home another coworker a different time. He had also recently been arrested for stalking yet a different woman. This guy was a total creep. I'm really glad that I don't have to worry about him anymore.